My mother-in-law replaced all my photos in their family home with pictures of my husband's ex-girlfriend. She'd introduced the ex as the daughter I should have had at gatherings. When she gave my engagement ring to the ex at Christmas dinner, I congratulated them both graciously. Her next family announcement would be far less celebratory. The sound of my engagement ring hitting the mahogany table was barely audible over the Christmas music playing softly in the background, but to me it rang like a gunshot. My mother-in-law's manicured fingers pushed the diamond solitaire across the polished surface with deliberate precision, sliding it directly into the outstretched palm of my husband's ex-girlfriend like she was passing a communion wafer. "This belongs with someone who truly appreciates family," she announced, her voice carrying that saccharine tone she reserved for moments when she wanted to appear generous while delivering a knife to the heart. "Before we continue with this story of quiet revenge, I want to thank you for being here with me. If you believe that women deserve respect in their families and shouldn't have to endure betrayal in silence, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to know they're not alone in these struggles." Now, let's see how I turned their cruelty into my greatest strength. The dining room, usually filled with the comfortable chatter of post-Christmas dinner conversation, fell into a silence so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Uncle Robert's fork froze halfway to his mouth, still laden with pumpkin pie. My sister-in-law Jennifer's eyes went wide behind her reading glasses, darting between me and the unfolding scene like she was watching a car accident in slow motion. Even the children, who had been arguing over the last dinner roll moments before, seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere and fell quiet. But I had been expecting this moment for weeks. The signs had been building all evening like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. During appetizers, my mother-in-law had made a point of seating the ex-girlfriend, Sarah, in what used to be my traditional spot beside the Christmas tree. When we gathered for family photos before dinner, she had somehow maneuvered me to the very edge of the group while positioning Sarah front and center, her arm draped possessively around my husband's waist. Most telling of all was the way she kept glancing at me throughout the meal, waiting for some reaction, some sign that I was finally ready to break. "Congratulations," I said, my voice steady and warm as summer honey. "It's absolutely beautiful on you, Sarah. It looks like it was meant for your hand." The words came out so naturally, so genuinely pleased, that even I was impressed by my own performance. I had practiced this moment in my bathroom mirror for 3 weeks, perfecting the exact tone of gracious defeat that would satisfy my mother-in-law's need to see me crumble while protecting my own dignity. Sarah's face flushed pink as she slipped the ring onto her finger. My ring finger, the same finger that had worn it for 4 years of marriage. She looked genuinely surprised by my reaction, perhaps expecting tears or protests or at least some visible sign of distress. Instead, I smiled and raised my wine glass in a mock toast. "To new beginnings," I said, meeting each pair of eyes around the table. "And to family." Jennifer shot me a look that was equal parts admiration and concern. She knew me well enough to recognize that my calm acceptance was more dangerous than any tantrum could have been. Her husband David cleared his throat uncomfortably and mumbled something about checking on the game in the living room, eager to escape the mounting tension. My husband, my soon-to-be ex-husband, though he didn't know it yet, sat frozen in his chair like a deer caught in headlights. His mother had orchestrated this entire scene without consulting him, and I could see the panic beginning to creep into his features as he realized he was now complicit in something he hadn't explicitly agreed to. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, searching for words that wouldn't come. The ring had been missing from my jewelry box for 3 months. When I'd asked about it, he'd mumbled something about having it cleaned and resized, a story so obviously fabricated that I hadn't bothered to challenge it. Instead, I'd done what any reasonable person would do in the digital age. I'd tracked down the receipt and called the jeweler myself. The ring hadn't been cleaned or resized. It had been picked up by his mother in September, accompanied by a woman matching Sarah's description. That phone call had been my wake-up moment, the instant I stopped being a victim and started being a strategist. "The ring was getting too loose on my finger anyway," I continued conversationally, taking another sip of wine. "Funny how things change when you lose weight from stress, isn't it? But it fits you perfectly, Sarah. Like it was always meant to be yours." My mother-in-law's smile faltered slightly. She had expected resistance, maybe even a scene that would justify her actions and paint me as the unstable, emotional wife who couldn't handle her son's happiness. Instead, my gracious acceptance was throwing off her entire script. Sarah twisted the ring nervously, the diamonds catching the light from the chandelier above. I didn't know you hadn't. I mean, she said you'd given it back willingly. Oh, but I did, I replied smoothly, meeting my mother-in-law's eyes directly. In a way. Sometimes we give things up without realizing we're doing it. Sometimes we're so focused on keeping peace that we forget to fight for what's ours. The double meaning hung in the air like incense, sweet and suffocating. Around the table, family members began to find excuses to leave. The children drifted toward the living room and their new toys. The men gravitated toward the football game on television. The women started clearing dishes with unusual efficiency, suddenly desperate to have something to do with their hands. But I remained seated, calmly finishing my dessert while my world officially ended. You know what I love most about Christmas? I mused aloud, addressing no one in particular. It's how it brings out people's true nature. All the pretending stops and you finally see who everyone really is beneath the wrapping paper and good intentions. My mother-in-law's jaw tightened. She wasn't stupid, she could hear the steel beneath my silk, the warning wrapped in Christmas sentiment. Family is everything to me, she said, her voice taking on that self-righteous tone she used when she wanted to appear noble. And sometimes family means making difficult decisions for the greater good. Absolutely, I agreed, standing to help clear the table. Family means knowing who truly belongs and who's just visiting. It means understanding the difference between blood loyalty and earned respect. Most importantly, it means remembering that every action has consequences. As I stacked plates and gathered silverware, I could feel the weight of their stares. Sarah kept touching the ring like a talisman, perhaps beginning to understand that she hadn't won a prize so much as inherited a burden. My husband looked increasingly uncomfortable, finally realizing that his mother had just blown up his marriage without consulting him first. But it was my mother-in-law's expression that satisfied me most. For the first time in our relationship, I saw uncertainty flicker across her features. She had expected me to crumble, to storm out, to give her the dramatic exit that would justify her actions to the rest of the family. Instead, I was still here, still smiling, still playing the perfect daughter-in-law even as she handed my marriage to another woman. That uncertainty was the first crack in her armor, and I intended to widen it until the whole structure came tumbling down. Later that night, as I lay in bed beside my silent husband, I stared at the ceiling and felt something cold and calculating settle into place where my heart used to be. Not anger. Anger was hot and unpredictable and ultimately self-destructive. This was something far more dangerous. Absolute clarity about who these people really were and what they were capable of. They had been planning this for months, maybe years. Every family gathering where Sarah was mysteriously invited. Every conversation about what's best for everyone. Every photo quietly removed from the mantle and replaced with memories that didn't include me. They had been erasing me systematically, counting on my politeness and my desire to keep peace to smooth their path. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. They assumed that because I didn't fight back I was weak. They confused kindness with naivety, grace with surrender. Tomorrow I would begin teaching them the difference. The ring was gone, but that was just the beginning. They wanted to play games with family loyalty and belonging. They wanted to see how far they could push before I broke. I smiled in the darkness, already planning my first move. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The phone sat in my hands for 30 minutes before I finally dialed her number. 2 weeks had passed since Christmas dinner, enough time for the initial shock to settle into something more useful, strategic thinking. I had spent those 14 days studying Sarah's social media profiles, learning her patterns, understanding what made her tick. Single mother, recently unemployed from a marketing firm, living in a cramped apartment with her 8-year-old daughter. Most importantly, increasingly dependent on my mother-in-law's financial support. Sarah. I let my voice crack slightly, just enough to suggest I'd been crying. It's me. I hope you don't mind me calling directly. The pause on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Oh. Hi. How did you get my number? From the family contact list, I replied, which was true. I've been thinking about Christmas dinner, about what happened. About how surprised you looked when she gave you the ring. Another pause. I could practically hear her mental wheels turning, trying to figure out if this was a trap. I want you to know I'm not angry with you, I continued, letting exhaustion seep into my voice. I think we're both being manipulated here, and I need someone who understands what it's like to deal with her. The shift in her breathing told me I'd hit the right note. You think she's manipulating me? Sarah, you've known her for how long? 6 years. 7. Has she ever, in all that time, done something that didn't somehow benefit her in the end? The silence stretched longer this time. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller, more uncertain. She said you'd given the ring back willingly. That you understood it belonged with someone who really loved the family. Did that seem like something I'd do? I asked gently. Give up my engagement ring without a fight? Or did it seem like something she'd orchestrate to make herself look generous while getting rid of me? I could hear her shifting in her chair, maybe pacing. I mean, she's been so good to me and Emma. She pays for Emma's dance classes, helps with groceries when money's tight. And what does she ask for in return? I pressed. Your presence at every family gathering? Your agreement with everything she says? Your willingness to be the daughter she never had while I'm standing right there. The sharp intake of breath told me I'd struck home. Look, I said, softening my tone, I don't want to fight with you. We're both just trying to survive in her world. Maybe we could talk in person? Somewhere away from all the family drama, where we can be honest with each other. An hour later, I was driving 43 minutes out of town to a generic coffee chain where nobody would recognize either of us. I'd chosen the location carefully, far enough from familiar territory that Sarah would feel safe speaking freely, busy enough that our conversation would be lost in the ambient noise, but quiet enough that I could control the mood. She was already there when I arrived, hunched over a large latte with extra foam, picking at a blueberry muffin. Without makeup and designer clothes, she looked younger, more vulnerable. Tired. The kind of tired that comes from constantly worrying about money and trying to be perfect for people who hold your security in their hands. Thank you for coming, I said, sliding into the seat across from her. I know this is weird. It's definitely weird, she agreed, but her smile was genuine. I wasn't sure what to expect. I ordered my own coffee, a simple black coffee, nothing fancy, and let the silence settle between us while I studied her face. Up close, I could see the stress lines around her eyes, the way she kept checking her phone for messages from Emma's school or potential employers. Can I ask you something honestly? I said finally. When she handed you that ring, did you know she hadn't told me it was happening? Sarah's cheeks flushed pink. I suspected. But she made it sound like it was already decided, like you'd agreed to it as part of some kind of divorce settlement. We're not getting divorced, I said carefully. At least there's been no discussion of it. The ring just disappeared from my jewelry box 3 months ago. Her eyes widened. She told me you'd given it back because you realized it should go to someone who understood the family legacy. What family legacy? The money. The investments. She said there were family traditions about who inherits what, and that I needed to understand my place in all of it if I was going to be part of the family. I felt my pulse quicken. This was better than I'd hoped. What kind of investments? Sarah glanced around nervously as if someone might be listening. She mentioned that your father-in-law had set up some kind of trust fund before he died. Overseas accounts, property investments, that sort of thing. She said it was complicated, that there were tax reasons why it had to be kept quiet. I leaned back in my chair, letting surprise cross my features. She told you about the overseas accounts? You know about them? I only found out recently, I whispered, leaning forward conspiratorially. I was going through some of his old papers in the attic, looking for our wedding photos that she claimed were somewhere safe. I found bank statements, account numbers, investment portfolios. Sir, there's so much money. Way more than anyone realizes. Her eyes went sharp with interest. How much money? I pulled out my phone and showed her a carefully doctored screenshot. A bank statement I'd created using my basic design skills and a legitimate bank's formatting. The account balance showed $847,000 in a Cayman Islands account under my late father-in-law's name. This is just one account, I said quietly. There are 4 others that I found. She's been living off the interest for years, telling everyone that his pension and social security are barely covering her expenses. Sarah stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open. She's been crying poverty while sitting on almost $1 million? More than that. Much more. I put my phone away, letting the image burn into her memory. And she's been using it to control everyone. Your dance classes for Emma? Your grocery money? She could afford to set you up for life, but instead she gives you just enough to keep you grateful and dependent. That. Sarah's voice trailed off as pieces started falling into place in her mind. That manipulative witch. Now you see why I think we're both being used, I said gently. She pits us against each other, makes us compete for scraps of her attention and approval, while she hoards resources that should benefit the whole family. Sarah's hands were shaking slightly as she reached for her latte. Emma's been asking for a bike for months. A used one from the thrift store cost $60 and I told her we couldn't afford it. Meanwhile, she's been sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars. The worst part is she's probably planning to cut us both out entirely, I continued. Think about it, she gives you my ring, makes you feel special and chosen, but has she mentioned anything about including you in her will? Has she talked about Emma's college fund, or your future security? The look on Sarah's face told me everything I needed to know. We need to protect ourselves, I said firmly. Both of us. And Emma deserves better than this. 2 weeks later, Sarah called me from her lawyer's office. The legal papers had been filed that morning. A formal demand for her rightful share of the estate, backed by the documents I'd helped her discover, and the testimony of neighbors who'd witnessed years of her being treated like family. My mother-in-law's phone started ringing that afternoon and it didn't stop for days. The phone calls started that afternoon. Hysterical, rambling conversations where my mother-in-law demanded that anyone make sense of what was happening to her. Sarah's lawyer had delivered the inheritance papers personally, showing up at her front door with a briefcase full of legal documents and a smile that promised expensive complications. But I was already 3 steps ahead, having spent the past week researching every gift Sarah had given my mother-in-law over the past year. The Louis Vuitton handbag for Mother's Day. The Mikimoto pearl necklace for her birthday. The Hermes silk scarf she'd worn to church every Sunday since receiving it. Each piece had been carefully chosen, expensive enough to demonstrate devotion, classic enough to appeal to my mother-in-law's traditional tastes. My divorce attorney had mentioned a man named Marcus during our initial consultation, not as someone I'd need, but as a cautionary tale about what happened when custody battles got ugly. He specializes in creating evidence, she'd said with distaste. Fake texts, doctored photos, that sort of thing. I refuse to work with people like that, but he exists. It had taken me 2 days to track down Marcus through a chain of referrals that led from family lawyers to private investigators to the kinds of people who advertised discreet services on websites that looked like they belonged in the early 2000s. His office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service, the kind of place you'd drive past without noticing. I need exact replicas of these items, I told him, spreading photos across his cluttered desk. But with modifications. Marcus was a thin man with nervous energy and ink-stained fingers who asked no questions about why someone would want replica designer goods that had been deliberately damaged. He quoted me a price that would have made me wince 6 months ago, but now felt like a worthwhile investment in psychological warfare. The modifications will take extra time, he'd warned. Especially if you want them to look authentic but disturbing. I want them to look like they were made by someone who loves her but has lost their mind, I'd replied. 3 weeks later, the first package arrived at my mother-in-law's house on a Tuesday morning when I knew she'd be alone. I'd been tracking her schedule through her social media posts and Jennifer's casual mentions of her activities. Yoga class on Mondays and Thursdays, grocery shopping on Wednesdays, bridge club on Fridays. Tuesdays were her hermit days, when she stayed home to clean and organize and generally prepare for the rest of the week. The Chanel bag looked perfect from a distance. Same quilted pattern, same gold chain, same leather texture. But Marcus had worked his magic in the details. The corners showed what appeared to be dried blood, dark brown stains that could have been anything but suggested something terrible. The interior smelled faintly of copper and decay, achieved through a combination of chemicals I didn't want to know about. The accompanying note was written in Sarah's distinctive handwriting, which I'd practiced for hours using samples from her legal documents and old birthday cards I'd found while helping clean out family storage boxes. You wanted me to be family, it read in blue ink that matched Sarah's preferred pen. Now you'll never forget me. I knew she'd received it when her first panicked phone call came that evening. Someone sent me something horrible, she told Jennifer, who immediately called me to relay the conversation. It looks like Sarah's bag, but it's been tampered with. There's something wrong with it. Maybe it's a manufacturing defect? Jennifer had suggested, playing her role perfectly without knowing she was part of my plan. No, this is deliberate. This is someone trying to scare me. The second package arrived the following Tuesday. The pearl necklace, now with several pearls replaced with what looked like human teeth. The dental work was convincing enough to pass casual inspection but disturbing enough to trigger deep unease. The clasp had been altered to leave marks on skin, tiny scratches that would heal but remain memorable. This time my mother-in-law didn't call Jennifer. She called the police. Officer Martinez was patient and professional when he responded to her complaint about threatening packages, but I could see the skepticism in his report when Jennifer showed it to me later. Without evidence of who was sending the packages, and with no explicit threats contained in the notes, there wasn't much the police could do beyond filing a report and suggesting she install security cameras. Has she been having any disputes with family members? Officer Martinez had asked, apparently unaware of the irony. Just the usual family drama, my mother-in-law had replied, probably not mentioning the inheritance lawsuit currently destroying her relationship with her chosen daughter. The third package was my masterpiece. The silk scarf had been rewoven with strands of Sarah's actual hair, collected during my reconnaissance visits to her salon. I'd posed as a potential client, complimenting the stylist's work on Sarah's color treatment while discreetly gathering the hair clippings that ended up in my purse. Marcus had somehow managed to incorporate them into the scarf's pattern so subtly that you had to look closely to notice. But once you saw them, you couldn't unsee them. The note this time was longer, more unhinged. Every thread connects us now. Every breath you take breathes me in. Family forever. My mother-in-law's reaction was everything I'd hoped for and more. Sunday dinner that week was supposed to be a celebration of my nephew's acceptance to college, but it turned into a battlefield when my mother-in-law arrived carrying a plastic bag full of altered gifts and accusations. "Look at what you've been sending me," she screamed at Sarah before anyone had even finished saying grace. "Look at these sick, twisted things." Sarah stared at the items spread across the dining room table, her face cycling through confusion, horror, and genuine fear. "I didn't send these. I don't know what these are. Don't lie to me. It's your handwriting. Your hair. Your sick way of trying to get into my head." The entire family watched in stunned silence as my mother-in-law ranted about psychological warfare and mind games, waving the modified scarf like evidence in a trial. Sarah's protests of innocence only seemed to fuel her conviction that she was being gaslit by someone she trusted. "You want my money so badly that you're trying to drive me insane," my mother-in-law continued, her voice reaching a pitch that made the children start crying. "You think if you scare me enough I'll just hand everything over. I don't know what you're talking about." Sarah shot back, tears streaming down her face. "I gave you those gifts because I love you. I would never do something like this." My husband finally found his voice, placing a hand on his mother's arm. "Mom, maybe you should sit down. Take a breath." She shook him off violently. "Don't you see what she's doing? She's trying to make me look crazy so you'll all side with her." I watched it all unfold from my seat at the far end of the table, occasionally offering concerned looks and gentle murmurs about how stress can make people see things differently. When Jennifer asked if I thought they should call someone, a doctor, a therapist, anyone, I suggested that maybe everyone just needed some space to process what was happening. The dinner ended with Sarah storming out, my mother-in-law barricading herself in the guest bathroom, and the rest of the family standing around looking like survivors of a natural disaster. Later, as we drove home in silence, my husband finally spoke. "Do you think Mom is losing it?" I reached over and squeezed his hand sympathetically. "I think she's under a lot of pressure lately. The lawsuit, the family tensions. Maybe she just needs professional help." He nodded slowly, probably already planning conversations with his siblings about intervention and elder care. I smiled in the darkness, knowing that the foundation of their relationship was cracked beyond repair. The conversations about my mother-in-law's mental health started that Monday morning, whispered phone calls between siblings who were finally admitting what they'd all been thinking. Jennifer called me first, her voice heavy with exhaustion and concern. "David thinks we should look into assisted living facilities," she said without preamble. "Not immediately, but maybe start researching options. Last night it was really bad." I made appropriate sounds of sympathy while mentally calculating my next move. The family was fracturing exactly as I'd planned, but I needed one final push to ensure my mother-in-law's complete isolation. Something decisive that would eliminate any possibility of her recovering her standing in their eyes. What kind of timeline are you thinking? I asked, injecting just the right amount of reluctant practicality into my voice. I don't know. She won't talk to any of us. She's convinced we're all conspiring against her with Sarah, which is insane because Sarah hasn't spoken to any of us since Sunday. Perfect. The paranoia was spreading faster than I'd anticipated. That afternoon, I sat in my car outside Marcus's office for 20 minutes before finally going inside. What I was about to do crossed a line I'd never imagined approaching, but my mother-in-law had forced this escalation when she chose to humiliate me publicly at Christmas dinner. I need something that looks like a debt collection notice, I told him, sliding a manila folder across his desk. Official letterhead, legal language, the works. Marcus examined my rough draft. A document claiming Sarah had loaned my mother-in-law $180,000 over the past 2 years, with interest and penalties bringing the total to nearly $200,000. The language was deliberately vague about the nature of the loans, suggesting everything from gambling debts to secret business investments. This is getting into fraud territory, Marcus warned, his fingers drumming nervously on his desk. Fake debt collection notices can trigger federal investigations. It's not fraud if it never gets filed with any official agency, I replied calmly. It's just a piece of paper designed to scare someone who's already paranoid. He quoted me a price that was triple his usual fee, clearly hoping I'd back down. Instead, I counted out cash from my emergency fund, money I'd been secretly saving for exactly this kind of situation. The document he produced 3 days later was a masterpiece of intimidation. Official-looking letterhead for Midwest Recovery Solutions, complete with case numbers and legal references that would check out if anyone bothered to verify them. The language was threatening without being overtly illegal, demanding immediate payment and threatening further collection actions if the debt wasn't resolved within 10 days. But the document was only half the plan. The other half required a different kind of contact, one that Marcus was reluctant to provide even after I'd paid him. These guys don't work for people like you, he said, scribbling a phone number on the back of a business card. They usually deal with actual debt collection, repo work, that kind of thing. They're not actors. I just need them to knock on a door and hand over some paperwork, I said. Nothing violent, nothing illegal. Just intimidation. The man who answered when I called had a voice like gravel in a cement mixer. He listened to my request without interruption, quoted me a price that made Marcus's fees look reasonable, and agreed to visit my mother-in-law's house the following Tuesday. We knock, we deliver the papers, we leave, he said. If she doesn't answer, we tape it to the door and go. That's it. That's all I need, I assured him, though some part of me wondered if I was making a terrible mistake. Tuesday afternoon found me parked 3 houses down from my mother-in-law's, ostensibly reading a book while actually watching for the arrival of my hired intimidators. I'd planned to simply drive by afterward and observe her reaction to finding the notice, but curiosity got the better of me. The 2 men who showed up looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for threatening debt collectors. One tall and thin, one broad and stocky, both wearing dark suits that had seen better days. They walked up to her front door with the confident stride of people accustomed to delivering bad news. I watched them knock. Wait. Knock again, louder this time. My mother-in-law's car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home. But after the past few weeks of mysterious packages and family drama, she'd apparently decided that answering the door was no longer safe. The men waited for exactly 3 minutes, I timed it, before the shorter one produced what looked like a lock-pick set from his jacket pocket. That wasn't part of the plan. I watched in growing horror as they actually opened her front door and disappeared inside the house. This was supposed to be simple intimidation, not breaking and entering. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, unsure whether to call the police or my own attorney. The sounds reached me even through my closed car windows. Crashes, shouting, the unmistakable noise of furniture being overturned. Whatever they were doing in there had escalated far beyond delivering paperwork. When my mother-in-law's front door burst open 15 minutes later, she stumbled out wearing only her nightgown, her hair wild and her voice raised in a scream that carried across the entire neighborhood. Help me. Someone help me. They're destroying everything. The 2 men emerged calmly behind her, walking to their car as if nothing unusual had happened. They drove away before the first neighbor appeared on their porch to investigate the commotion. I sat frozen in my car, watching as my mother-in-law collapsed on her front lawn, sobbing and gesturing wildly at her house. Mrs. Patterson from next door was the first to reach her, wrapping a bathrobe around her shoulders and pulling out her phone to call for help. When the police arrived, my mother-in-law was nearly incoherent. Between gasps and tears, she tried to explain about debt collectors and legal documents and people trying to frame her, but the story sounded like the ravings of someone having a complete mental breakdown. Officer Martinez was among the responding officers, and I could see him exchanging meaningful looks with his partner as my mother-in-law rambled about family conspiracies and fake inheritances. "Ma'am, you mentioned debt collectors," Officer Martinez said patiently. "Do you have any documentation about debts you owe?" That's when my mother-in-law realized her trap. She couldn't produce the fake debt notice without explaining the fake inheritance lawsuit. She couldn't explain why legitimate debt collectors would break into her house without admitting that maybe they weren't legitimate. Every answer led to questions she couldn't answer without revealing the web of lies I'd helped create around her. "It's all connected," she kept saying, her voice rising with frustration. "The packages, the lawsuit, the money. Someone is trying to drive me crazy and nobody believes me." The irony was that she was absolutely right, but she'd spent so many weeks appearing paranoid and unstable that the truth sounded like delusion. I watched the police take their report, saw them examining the damage inside her house through the open front door. Someone had indeed carved "thief" into her antique dining table, along with several other words I couldn't make out from my distance. Her living room looked like a hurricane had passed through it. When Jennifer's car pulled up an hour later, I finally drove away. I'd seen enough to know that my mother-in-law's credibility was permanently destroyed. Whatever story she told about debt collectors and break-ins would be filtered through her family's growing conviction that she was losing her mind. That night, I lay in bed listening to my husband's side of the phone conversation with his sister, their voices heavy with the weight of decisions no adult child wants to make. "We can't keep pretending this is normal," he said. "She needs professional help and she needs it now." I closed my eyes and smiled in the darkness, finally feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: complete and total vindication. The satisfaction I felt watching my husband hang up the phone lasted exactly 12 hours before reality set in. I had crossed lines I couldn't uncross, done things that would horrify the woman I used to be. But as I sat in my kitchen the next morning, drinking coffee and scrolling through Sarah's increasingly desperate social media posts, I realized I wasn't done yet. Her Instagram story from Tuesday night showed a hastily packed suitcase and a caption that read, "Sometimes you have to know when to cut your losses. New city, new life, new beginning. #fresh start, #toxic free, #movingin." Within an hour, I'd called the airline's customer service line, pretending to be her concerned friend who needed to know her flight details to pick her up at her destination. The script I'd prepared was convincing: worried friend, family emergency, urgent contact needed. The customer service representative was sympathetic enough to confirm that Sarah Chin had a reservation on Flight 447 to Phoenix, departing Thursday at 2:15 p.m. Phoenix made sense. Her sister lived there, the one who'd been sending occasional supportive comments on Sarah's posts throughout this entire ordeal. Sarah was running home to regroup, probably planning to reinvent herself somewhere nobody knew about the inheritance lawsuit or the debt collection drama. But I couldn't let her leave with a clean slate, not after everything she'd put me through. The ring on her finger, my ring, was just the beginning of what she'd taken from me. She'd stolen my place in the family, my husband's attention, my mother-in-law's affection. She deserved to understand what public humiliation felt like, what it was like to have strangers stare and whisper and judge. That evening, I drove to Marcus's office one final time. The strip mall was nearly empty at 7 p.m., just the nail salon still open with one customer getting a late pedicure. "I need one more favor," I told him, placing the remaining altered jewelry box on his desk. This was the piece de resistance, a small Tiffany box that originally contained earrings, now modified with his signature touch. The foul smell emanating from it was somehow worse than the others, sweet and cloying like flowers left too long in water. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Marcus asked, clearly uncomfortable with how far our arrangement had evolved. "Nothing. I just need to borrow it for a few hours tomorrow." He stared at me for a long moment, probably seeing something in my expression that made him nervous. "Look, lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I'm starting to think." "You're starting to think what?" I interrupted, my voice sharper than I'd intended. That maybe you shouldn't have taken cash payments for creating fake evidence? That maybe you should have asked more questions about why someone needed replica designer goods that smelled like death. His mouth shut with an audible click. We both knew he was too deep in this to start developing a conscience now. Thursday morning I dressed carefully, business casual, nothing memorable, the kind of outfit that would blend into any airport crowd. I arrived at the departure terminal 2 hours before Sarah's flight, giving myself plenty of time to observe her check-in routine and identify the perfect moment for my final act. She looked terrible. Even from across the departure hall, I could see the stress lines around her eyes, the way she kept checking her phone for messages that probably weren't coming. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing a wrinkled t-shirt that suggested she'd slept in it. Emma wasn't with her, which meant she'd either left her daughter with relatives or, more likely, couldn't afford to bring her along on this escape attempt. That detail bothered me more than it should have. Whatever else Sarah had done, Emma was innocent in all this. I watched Sarah struggle with her oversized suitcase at the check-in kiosk, clearly flustered by the weight restrictions and additional fees. When she stepped away to reorganize her belongings, I made my move. The departures area was crowded enough that nobody paid attention to one middle-aged woman briefly approaching an unattended suitcase. The jewelry box slipped into the outer pocket of her carry-on bag like it belonged there, nestled between what looked like phone chargers and travel documents. Then I found a seat in the departure lounge cafe, ordered a latte I didn't want, and opened a magazine I couldn't focus on. The wait was excruciating. Sarah made it through the initial security checkpoint without incident, and for a moment I wondered if my plan had failed. Maybe they wouldn't search her bag. Maybe the smell wasn't strong enough to trigger suspicion. Maybe I'd spent weeks orchestrating this elaborate revenge only to watch her fly away untouched. But then I saw the TSA agent wrinkle his nose as Sarah's bag went through the scanner. "Ma'am, we need to do a secondary screening of your carry-on," he announced, pulling her bag aside. Sarah's confusion was genuine. She had no idea what they might find. I watched her face cycle through puzzlement, then concern, then dawning horror as the agent opened the outer pocket and the smell hit him full force. "What is this?" he demanded, holding the jewelry box at arm's length. I don't know," Sarah stammered. "I've never seen that before in my life." The lie was technically true, but it sounded exactly like what someone would say if they'd been caught smuggling something illegal. Within minutes, additional security personnel had arrived, and Sarah was being escorted to a private screening room. I couldn't hear the conversation from my position in the cafe, but I could see Sarah's increasingly frantic gestures through the glass partition. She was trying to explain something, probably the inheritance lawsuit, the debt collection incident, the recent family drama. But the more she talked, the more suspicious she appeared. Airport security doesn't care about family feuds or civil lawsuits. They care about potential threats to aviation security, and a woman traveling with mysteriously altered items that reeked of decay fit their profile of someone worth investigating thoroughly. When they missed her boarding call by 40 minutes, I knew my plan had succeeded. The questioning lasted for hours. I ordered another coffee, bought a newspaper, and settled in to watch the aftermath unfold. Sarah's social media updates began around hour 3. Increasingly desperate posts about being detained for no reason, and framed by people who want to destroy my life. Her friends' responses were initially supportive, but as the details of her situation became clearer, the tone shifted. Questions about why someone would be carrying suspicious items at an airport. Speculation about what kind of family drama could escalate to this level. Gradual distancing from someone whose problems were clearly more complicated than a simple custody dispute or inheritance disagreement. By the time security finally released her 12 hours later, Sarah's reputation was as damaged as my mother-in-law's. Her missed flight had cost her money she couldn't afford to lose. Her social media presence was flooded with questions she couldn't answer without sounding paranoid or delusional. Most importantly, she now understood exactly what I'd felt sitting at that Christmas dinner table. The humiliation of being powerless while people around you made decisions about your life. The frustration of knowing the truth but being unable to make anyone believe it. As I finally left the airport that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood. Perfect, complete justice. Not the legal kind that takes years and costs fortunes, but the immediate personal kind that comes from watching someone reap exactly what they've sown. Sarah would eventually make it to Phoenix, But she'd arrive carrying baggage that had nothing to do with airlines and everything to do with the choices she'd made when she decided to steal someone else's life. The drive home from the airport took me through the old neighborhood where I'd grown up, past the elementary school where I'd learned that fairness was something you had to fight for, not something that was handed to you. I parked outside my childhood home for 20 minutes, watching a different family live in the space where I'd once believed the world was fundamentally just. That little girl who'd cried when other kids cut in line or took her lunch money would barely recognize the woman I'd become. But she'd be proud of me. 3 weeks later, my husband appeared on my doorstep with grocery store flowers and the kind of wounded expression he'd perfected during our marriage whenever he needed forgiveness for something he couldn't quite bring himself to acknowledge. He'd waited, I realized, for the worst of the storm to pass. Sarah was gone, his mother was in therapy, and the family had collectively decided to pretend the entire inheritance fiasco had been a misunderstanding caused by stress and grief. "Can I come in?" he asked, shifting the bouquet from one hand to the other like he wasn't sure what to do with it. I stepped aside and let him enter, noting how he paused in the entryway to take in the changes I'd made to my house. The family photos were gone from the mantel, replaced with art I'd chosen myself. The furniture had been rearranged to create conversation areas that felt more like a sanctuary than a showplace. Everything about the space now reflected my taste rather than the compromise aesthetic that had defined our marriage. "The place looks good," he said carefully. "Different but good." I waited for him to continue, offering neither encouragement nor resistance. He'd come here with a speech prepared, probably rehearsed in his car during the drive over, and I was curious to hear how he planned to rewrite our history. "I know I messed up," he began, settling into the chair that used to be his favorite. "I should have defended you better. I should have seen what my mother was doing and put a stop to it." I replied non-committally, taking a seat across from him rather than beside him. "The thing is, I never wanted any of this to happen. The ring, Sarah, all the family drama. I got caught in the middle and didn't know how to handle it." He was trying to position himself as another victim of his mother's manipulation, I realized. In his version of events, we'd both been pawns in her game rather than him being a willing participant in my systematic erasure from the family. "I've been thinking about us a lot lately," he continued, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "About what we had before everything got so complicated. The new engagement ring was larger than my original, more expensive, probably chosen to demonstrate the sincerity of his apology through carat weight. He set it on the coffee table between us like an offering. "I want to try again," he said. "If you'll have me." I stared at the ring for a long moment, letting him marinate in the silence. This was the moment he'd been building toward. The grand gesture that was supposed to sweep away months of betrayal and neglect. He was counting on my capacity for forgiveness, banking on the idea that I was still the woman who'd absorbed years of small humiliations in the name of keeping peace. "That's beautiful," I said finally. "She must have expensive taste." His face went through several expressions before settling on confusion. "She? Your mother? I assume she picked this one out too, the way she picked out Sarah's Christmas present." The color drained from his cheeks. "I chose this myself. Mom had nothing to do with it." "Did you though?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Or did you choose it the way you chose to give her my original ring for safekeeping? The way you chose to stay silent while she erased me from your family photos? The way you chose to let Sarah take my seat at dinner tables for months?" He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. We both knew the truth. His choices had always been about avoiding conflict with his mother, never about protecting me. "I can't undo what happened," he said finally. "But I can promise it won't happen again." I picked up the ring box and examined it more closely. The diamond was beautiful, flawless, the kind of stone that would make other women envious at social gatherings. Everything a proper engagement ring should be. "The problem with promises," I said, closing the box with a soft click, "is that they require trust. And trust, once broken, doesn't just magically repair itself because someone brings flowers and jewelry." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden I'd been redesigning since the divorce papers were filed. My lawyer had been surprised when I'd insisted on keeping the house. It was more than I could easily afford alone. But I'd needed something that was entirely mine, a space where nobody else's opinions or preferences held any weight. "So what are you saying?" he asked, his voice smaller now. "I'm saying I'll think about it." And I did think about it for exactly the length of time it took him to drive away. Then I called my therapist and scheduled an extra session for the following week. Dr. Morrison had been the first person to suggest that maybe my marriage problems weren't actually about communication or compromise. Some people drain energy from others, she'd said during our third session. They take until you don't recognize yourself anymore. The question isn't whether you can fix the relationship, it's whether you want to go back to being the person you were in it. I didn't. My husband kept calling after that, leaving voicemails that started apologetic and gradually became more demanding. Why wasn't I answering? When would I give him a real answer? Didn't he deserve better than this silent treatment after everything he'd been through with his family? The entitlement in that last message made me laugh out loud. Everything he'd been through. As if he'd been the victim of his mother's schemes rather than their beneficiary. I changed my phone number the following week. The job offer from the marketing firm in Denver came at exactly the right time. A friend from college had recommended me for the position, and the salary was enough to justify leaving everything familiar behind. When I called to accept, the HR manager seemed pleased by my enthusiasm for starting fresh in a new environment. If only she knew. My mother-in-law's world was shrinking in ways that must have terrified her. Jennifer told me during one of our increasingly rare conversations that their mother was seeing a psychiatrist twice a week and taking medication for anxiety. The inheritance lawsuit had cost her nearly $40,000 in legal fees, money she couldn't afford to lose on her fixed income. She keeps talking about being framed, Jennifer said wearily. The therapist thinks it's a form of paranoid thinking brought on by stress and isolation. That must be difficult for all of you, I replied, injecting just the right amount of sympathy into my voice. The worst part is we can't have normal family gatherings anymore. She gets suspicious if too many people are there, like we're plotting against her. Last Sunday she accused David of recording her conversation with his phone. The family I'd once desperately wanted to belong to was fragmenting exactly as I'd planned, each member retreating into their own protective shells rather than dealing with the toxic dynamics that had always existed beneath the surface of their holiday smiles. Are you still planning to come to Christmas dinner? Jennifer asked hesitantly. I paused, considering. The invitation wasn't extended out of love or genuine desire for my company. It was guilt and social obligation, the same forces that had kept me trapped in their orbit for years. But now I had a choice. I'll try to make it, I said, already knowing I'd cancel at the last minute. Though I might have to work that weekend. The lie came so easily now, smooth as silk and twice as comfortable. That evening, I tried on my original engagement ring for the first time since it had been returned through Sarah's legal proceedings. It fit perfectly the way it always had, but it felt different on my finger. Heavier. Not with sentiment, but with the weight of everything I'd learned about myself in the process of getting it back. I wasn't the same woman who'd worn it innocently for 4 years, believing that love and goodness would eventually triumph over selfishness and manipulation. I was someone harder now, more calculating, less willing to absorb other people's cruelty in the name of keeping peace. Some people might call that damaged. I called it educated. Christmas morning in Denver was different. Snow fell in fat, lazy flakes outside my new apartment window, and for the first time in years, I woke up without checking my phone for family drama or obligatory holiday messages. The silence was perfect. Jennifer had called 3 times the night before, each voicemail more desperate than the last. Please come. She keeps asking if you're coming. I think she needs to see you. My mother-in-law was dying. Not dramatically, not from anything I'd caused, but quietly succumbing to the stress-related heart condition that had worsened since her world collapsed. The doctor said she had weeks, maybe a month. I booked a flight that afternoon. The family gathered at Jennifer's house looked like survivors of a natural disaster. My husband sat alone in a corner, the rejected engagement ring probably still sitting in his sock drawer. David avoided eye contact, embarrassed by his mother's public breakdown months earlier. The grandchildren played quietly, sensing the adults' discomfort. And there she was, my mother-in-law, shrunken in a wheelchair by the window. The woman who'd once commanded every room she entered now looked frail and uncertain, her eyes darting nervously whenever someone approached. She saw me before anyone else did. You came, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I walked over and knelt beside her wheelchair, close enough that only she could hear me. Of course I came. We're family, remember? Her eyes searched my face, looking for something, forgiveness, perhaps, or acknowledgement of what she'd put me through. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out a small wrapped box. "I brought you something," I said, placing it in her trembling hands. She unwrapped it slowly, her fingers struggling with the paper. Inside was a jewelry box, not one of Marcus's altered pieces, but a simple, elegant container holding my original engagement ring. "I thought you should have this back," I said quietly, "since you seem to think it belonged to your family." She stared at the ring, her breath coming in short gasps. "I don't understand." "Yes, you do." I leaned closer, my voice barely a whisper. "You taught me something important about family loyalty. About how people show their true nature when they think no one is watching. About how power works in families like yours." Her eyes widened as understanding dawned. Not the paranoid delusions she'd been grappling with for months, but crystal clear comprehension of exactly who had orchestrated her downfall. "It was you," she breathed. "Merry Christmas," I replied, standing up and smoothing my dress. I stayed for dinner, making pleasant conversation about my new job and apartment. When people asked about my plans, I spoke enthusiastically about starting over, about how liberating it felt to build a life based on my own choices rather than other people's expectations. As I prepared to leave, my mother-in-law caught my arm with surprising strength. "Why?" she asked. I looked down at her, this woman who'd spent years trying to erase me from her son's life, and felt something I'd never expected: pity. "Because you forgot something important," I said gently. "When you push someone hard enough, eventually they stop pulling themselves back up. They learn to push back instead." I walked out of that house for the last time, leaving behind a family that had never truly been mine. In my car, I finally allowed myself to cry, not for what I'd lost but for what I'd found. 3 weeks later, Jennifer called to tell me my mother-in-law had passed peacefully in her sleep. I sent flowers and a sympathy card, but I didn't attend the funeral. Some chapters once closed should stay that way. I never saw any of them again. If this story of calculated revenge had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when she handed back that engagement ring, watching her mother-in-law finally realize who destroyed her world. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
I'm Allison Carter, 27 years old, and my entire life shattered during a Sunday dinner with my parents. There I was, cutting into my mother's famous pot roast in their Connecticut suburban home when my phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number flashed across my screen: "Get up and leave. Don't say anything to your parents." My fork clattered against the plate. Mom looked up concerned. Dad's eyes narrowed. My heart hammered in my chest as I stared at those words. How could I possibly know that in the next few minutes, everything I believed about my life would unravel completely? Before I continue this story, if you're watching from your own dinner table, hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because trust me, nothing was ever the same after that message. Sunday dinners had been a sacred tradition in the Carter household for as long as I could remember. My mother, Brenda, spent the entire day preparing elaborate meals that would make Food Network chefs envious. My father, Frank, always contributed by selecting premium wines that complemented whatever culinary masterpiece Mom created. Tonight was no different, at least it wasn't supposed to be. I had moved back to my hometown of Westport 6 months ago after what my parents delicately referred to as my career adjustment period in New York. The publishing company I worked for had downsized, and my apartment's rent had upsized. The combination left me little choice but to retreat to my childhood bedroom, a situation that was meant to be temporary but was increasingly feeling permanent. "More potatoes, sweetheart?" Mom offered, already scooping a second helping onto my plate before I could respond. "I'm good, actually," I said, pushing the plate back slightly. Dad cleared his throat. "You know, Allison, Patricia Mitchell's daughter just made partner at her law firm. She's only 29. I stabbed at a carrot. "That's great for her, Dad." "It is great," he agreed, swirling his wine. "Shows what hard work and persistence can accomplish." These subtle jabs had become more frequent since my return. My parents never directly criticized my life choices, but they had perfected the art of casually mentioning the successes of my peers while giving me sympathetic looks. Did I tell you that Jason called the house last week? Mom mentioned, too casually. Jason was my ex-boyfriend, a relationship that had ended badly 8 months ago. He asked how you were doing. That's nice, I replied neutrally, though internally I was seething. Why was my mother still talking to my ex? He's been promoted at the bank, she continued. Said he's traveling to London next month for business. Wonderful for him, I muttered, taking a large sip of wine. The dynamic was always the same. Their seemingly perfect marriage and life choices contrasted with my apparent failures. Dad, a successful corporate attorney, and Mom, the consummate homemaker who ran the local historical society, versus me, the unemployed writer who couldn't maintain a relationship longer than 2 years. What made tonight different, though, was the strange tension I'd noticed between them earlier. I had overheard them arguing in the kitchen that morning. Something about timing and being careful. When I entered, they'd immediately stopped talking and plastered on those plastic smiles parents think their children can't see through. Mom had outdone herself with dinner preparation today: pot roast, homemade rolls, 3 side dishes, and her special occasion apple pie for dessert. It was the kind of meal she usually reserved for holidays or when they were entertaining important guests, not an ordinary Sunday. I was thinking, Dad said, refilling his wine glass, that maybe it's time you considered going back to school. Get your MBA. My firm has connections at several good programs. I don't think business school is really my path, Dad, I replied, the same response I'd given the last 5 times he'd suggested it. Well, your path has led you back to your childhood bedroom at 27, he said with a forced chuckle that was meant to soften the blow but only sharpened it. Mom jumped in with forced cheerfulness. I ran into Judy Miller at the grocery store. Her daughter Katie just got engaged. Beautiful ring, apparently. The unspoken message was clear. Everyone else your age is moving forward while you're moving backward. As they continued their subtle assault on my life choices, I noticed other oddities. Dad checked his watch 3 times in 20 minutes. Mom kept glancing at the front window whenever a car drove by. They both seemed nervous? On edge? It was subtle, but after 27 years, I could read their tells. Earlier in the day, I'd noticed Dad taking a phone call in the garage, unusual for him, as he typically had no problem talking business in front of us. When I'd walked in to ask if he needed help carrying in groceries, he'd quickly ended the call with a curt, "We'll finish this later." Mom had been oddly insistent about tonight's dinner, too. When I'd mentioned possibly meeting friends for drinks, her reaction had been disproportionately disappointed, almost panicked. But I've already started cooking, and your father specifically requested that we all eat together tonight. There was also the locked basement room, Dad's office, that had mysteriously become off-limits in the last few years. I'd never questioned it much. Everyone deserves private space. But combined with the other peculiarities, it suddenly seemed significant. I was mentally cataloging these inconsistencies when my phone vibrated against the table. I expected it to be my friend Haley, who'd been texting about meeting up later. Instead, I saw the unknown number and that message that would change everything: get up and leave. Don't say anything to your parents. My hands trembled as I stared at the text message. Every instinct told me this was serious, but it also seemed absurd. Leave my parents' house because of an anonymous text? It had to be a prank, or someone had the wrong number. Everything okay, honey? Mom asked, her voice carrying a strange note of tension. Oh, yeah. Just work stuff, I lied, slipping the phone into my pocket. Work stuff, from the job I didn't have. Neither parent questioned this obvious hole in my story. I need to use the bathroom, I mumbled, pushing my chair back. Once locked in the upstairs bathroom, I pulled out my phone to examine the message again. As I stared at it, another text came through from the same number. They aren't who you think they are. There's a car waiting at the end of the street. You have 5 minutes. My heart pounded so hard I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I moved to the bathroom window and peered through the blinds. Sure enough, a black sedan with tinted windows idled at the corner of our quiet suburban street, its engine running. This was insane. I was about to ignore the whole thing when fragments of memories began flooding my mind, inconsistencies I'd noticed over the years, but had dismissed. Dad's business trips that never seemed to align with his court schedule. The way my parents stiffened whenever police cars drove by. The locked room in the basement that appeared when I was 16, which I was never allowed to enter. The fact that we had moved 3 times during my childhood for increasingly vague reasons. How I'd never met my grandparents because they were supposedly estranged, yet there were no photos of them anywhere. That time I found Mom burning documents in the backyard when I came home unexpectedly from school. The way they discouraged me from submitting my DNA to one of those ancestry websites when I'd expressed interest. Each incident alone seemed minor, explainable. Together, they formed a disturbing pattern. I had to make a decision. Trust this mysterious texter and leave, or dismiss it and continue dinner as if nothing had happened. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized the pale, frightened face staring back at me. What if, and this seemed crazy even to think, what if my parents actually weren't who they claimed to be? 5 minutes. The car would only wait 5 minutes. I flushed the toilet for show and ran water in the sink before heading back downstairs, my mind racing with possible excuses. Sorry about that, I said, forcing a smile as I returned to the dining room. Actually, I just got a message from Haley. There's some kind of emergency with her roommate. I should probably head over there. Mom's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Now? But we haven't had dessert. I made your favorite apple pie. I know, I'm sorry. Rain check? It sounds pretty urgent. I grabbed my purse from the back of my chair. What kind of emergency? Dad asked, his tone suspiciously sharp. Something about a burst pipe in their apartment. Haley's freaking out. Mom stood suddenly. At least let me pack you some dinner to take with you. No need, really, I insist, she said, already moving to block my path to the door, her body positioned in a way that seemed casual, but effectively prevented me from leaving. Dad checked his watch again. Why don't I drive you? It's getting dark. Their behavior was setting off alarm bells. The way they were trying to delay me, the strange look they exchanged when they thought I wasn't watching. Actually, I forgot something in my room. Be right back, I said, heading for the stairs before either could object. Instead of going to my bedroom, I slipped into my parents' room and looked out their window, which overlooked the backyard. The wooden fence had a gate that led to the alley behind our house, a potential escape route. I could hear Mom and Dad speaking in hushed, urgent tones downstairs, though I couldn't make out the words. This was madness. I was acting like I was in some kind of spy movie, planning an escape from my own parents. Yet, something deep in my gut told me the danger was real. I crept down the back staircase that led to the kitchen. Mom and Dad were still in the dining room, their voices tense. I quietly unlocked the side door that led to the backyard, wincing at the slight squeak of the hinges. Once outside, I didn't hesitate. I ran across the lawn, unlatched the gate, and slipped into the alley. Looking back at the house, I saw Dad's silhouette appear at the upstairs window, phone pressed to his ear. Fear propelled me forward. I sprinted down the alley and around the block, staying close to the shadows of trees and fences. When I reached the corner where the black sedan waited, I hesitated for just a moment. Getting into a stranger's car went against everything I'd ever been taught about personal safety. But then I heard my father's voice calling my name from the direction of our house, and I made my choice. I yanked open the car's back door and jumped inside. Drive, I gasped to the woman behind the wheel, my heart threatening to burst from my chest as the car pulled away from the curb. Seat belt, the woman said calmly as she accelerated, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. She appeared to be in her early 40s, with short auburn hair and the focused demeanor of someone who had handled numerous crises. My trembling hands fumbled with the seatbelt as I twisted to look out the back window. There was no sign of pursuit yet, but my panic hadn't subsided. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice higher than normal. "What's going on?" "My name is Dana Winters. I'm with the U.S. Marshal Service, Witness Security Division." She flashed a badge that looked official, though I had no way of verifying its authenticity. "And you're not Allison Carter." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What are you talking about?" Of course, I'm Allison Carter. Dana took a sharp turn onto the highway on-ramp. Your real name is Allison Reynolds. The people you know as Frank and Brenda Carter are not your biological parents. They were assigned to protect you as part of a witness protection program that began 20 years ago. I laughed, a high, slightly hysterical sound. This is insane. You've got the wrong person. My parents are not who they claim to be, Dana interrupted. And right now, they're extremely dangerous to you. This doesn't make any sense. My head was spinning. If they were protecting me, why would they suddenly be dangerous? Because they've been compromised, Dana said grimly. Your real parents testified against the Blackwood Organization, one of the most dangerous crime syndicates on the East Coast. The testimony put away Gregory Blackwood for life, but his network has continued operating. Recently, they've gotten close to identifying witnesses from that case. I shook my head in disbelief. If what you're saying is true, and I'm not saying it is, why would these people suddenly turn against me? We've been monitoring them for the past month after intercepting communications between your father, Frank Carter, and known associates of the Blackwood Organization. Dana reached into the console and handed me a manila envelope. Open it. Inside were surveillance photos. I recognized my father meeting with men I'd never seen before in parking garages and diners. There were also transcripts of phone conversations. Taking care of loose ends will solve both our problems, read one line attributed to my father. The package needs to be delivered intact, read a response from someone identified only as operative. The package, Dana said quietly. That's you, Allison. This could mean anything, I protested, but my conviction was wavering. You're telling me my parents were planning to, what? Hand me over to criminals? That's absurd. Your adoptive parents were originally trusted agents with the Marshals Service, Dana explained. They were assigned to your case because of their exemplary record. But something changed. We believe they were compromised approximately 7 years ago. Financial records show unexplained deposits. Their behavior patterns altered. They maintained their cover, but they've been feeding information to the Blackwood Organization. Why not just arrest them then? Why the cloak and dagger routine with the text messages? Because we needed to get you out first. Once you were safe, a team was going to move in. But something accelerated their timeline. This morning, we intercepted communications suggesting they were planning to deliver you tonight. The reality of what she was saying began to sink in. If this woman was telling the truth and the evidence was becoming harder to ignore, then my entire life had been a carefully constructed lie. I don't understand, I whispered, tears forming. If they were going to hurt me, why wait all these years? I've been living with them my whole life. Not because of you, Dana said softly. Because of what you have. What I have. I don't have anything of value. The pendant your mother gave you for your 16th birthday. The one you always wear. May I see it? My hand instinctively went to the silver oval locket that hung around my neck. Mom, or whoever she was, had given it to me, telling me it had belonged to my grandmother. I'd worn it nearly every day since, considering it my lucky charm. With shaking fingers, I unclasped it and handed it to Dana, who examined it carefully before pressing what appeared to be a seamless part of the design. To my shock, the locket opened in an unusual way, revealing not the expected photo space, but a tiny microchip. This contains encrypted evidence that could dismantle what remains of the Blackwood Organization, Dana explained. Your biological parents ensured it would be protected with you, hidden in plain sight. The Blackwoods have been searching for this evidence for 2 decades. And the Carters, they knew about this? They didn't initially. But we believe they discovered it several years ago and have been biding their time, waiting for the right offer from the Blackwoods. Dana carefully closed the locket and handed it back to me. We need to get this to a secure location, and you're the key to accessing the encryption. I clasped the necklace back around my neck, my mind reeling with questions. My real parents, are they alive? Dana's expression softened slightly. Yes. They're in a separate protection program. Their location is classified, even for me. The revelation that my biological parents might be alive somewhere hit me with unexpected force. All these years, I'd believed Frank and Brenda Carter were my only family. Where are we going? I asked, noticing we were heading north on the highway. Safe house in Vermont. We'll meet Agent Thompson there. He's the one who sent you the text messages. We have 48 hours to get you secured before the Blackwood organization realizes you're gone and starts hunting in earnest. I turned to look out the window, watching as the familiar Connecticut landscape disappeared behind us, along with everything I thought I knew about my life. After 4 hours of driving through increasingly remote areas, we finally turned onto a gravel road that wound through dense forest. The safe house was actually a rustic cabin, set back from the road and barely visible until we were upon it. Under different circumstances, I might have found it charming. Agent Michael Thompson greeted us at the door. He was tall with salt and pepper hair and the same hyper-alert demeanor as Dana. He'd been the one who sent the text messages that had saved me or abducted me, depending on whose version of reality was correct. I still wasn't entirely convinced. "You made good time," he said to Dana before turning to me. "Ms. Reynolds, I'm glad you trusted your instincts." "I didn't have much choice," I replied, stepping into the cabin. It was sparse but comfortable, with basic furniture and heavy curtains covering all the windows. "And I'm still not sure I should trust either of you." "That's fair," Thompson acknowledged, gesturing for me to sit at a small dining table. "I imagine you have questions." "About a million," I said, dropping into a chair. The adrenaline that had carried me through the evening was fading, leaving me shaky and exhausted. Thompson placed a folder on the table. "This contains your original birth certificate, photos of your biological parents, and documentation of the witness protection program you've been part of since you were 7 years old." I opened the folder with trembling hands. The birth certificate listed my name as Allison Marie Reynolds, born to Thomas and Catherine Reynolds in Boston, Massachusetts, not Hartford, Connecticut, as I'd always believed. The attached photo showed a couple holding a young child who was unmistakably me, with the same distinctive hazel eyes and dimple in my right cheek. "I don't remember them," I whispered, tracing their faces with my fingertip. "You were young when you entered the program," Dana said gently. "It's common for children to adapt to their new identities so completely that they lose conscious memory of their previous lives." "What did they do? My real parents?" "Your father was an accountant for the Blackwood organization," Thompson explained. "When he discovered they were using their legitimate businesses to launder money from drug trafficking and other criminal enterprises, he collected evidence and went to the FBI. Your mother supported his decision. Their testimony was crucial in the case against Gregory Blackwood." "And the Carters? Were they ever really married, or was that part of their cover?" "They were married before they joined the Marshals Service," Dana confirmed. "They were childless and had excellent records as agents, which made them ideal candidates to raise you. For many years, they did their job well." "What changed?" I asked, the betrayal still fresh and stinging. Thompson and Dana exchanged looks. 7 years ago, Frank Carter made some poor investment decisions that left them in significant debt, Thompson said. "We believe the Blackwood organization discovered this vulnerability and approached them with an offer. So they sold me out for money," I said flatly. "It likely started small," Dana suggested. "Information about your whereabouts, your activities." Over time, their involvement deepened. I thought about all the times my parents had insisted on knowing where I was going, who I was with. The tracking app they'd convinced me to install on my phone for safety. Their disappointment when I moved to New York, and their barely concealed relief when I returned. The relocations during my childhood, I realized aloud. Those weren't random moves for Dad's job, were they? "Security precautions," Thompson confirmed. "Whenever we detected potential threats, we moved your family." "And those relatives we occasionally visited?" "Other agents checking in, verifying your safety and the Carters' adherence to protocols." I stood up suddenly, needing to move as revelations continued to crash over me. This is too much. My entire life has been a lie. The people who raised me were planning to hand me over to criminals. I don't even know who I am anymore. "You're the same person you've always been," Dana said firmly. "Your experiences, your choices, your personality, those are real, Allison." "Am I?" "Because it seems like Allison Carter doesn't exist, and I'm not sure who Allison Reynolds is supposed to be." I spent that night in a small bedroom at the back of the cabin, staring at the ceiling as my mind replayed memories, recontextualizing them with this new information. The strange arguments I'd overheard between my parents that suddenly stopped when I entered the room. The way they discouraged certain friendships. Their insistence that I attend college close to home. My entire identity had been constructed as a shield, and now that shield had been ripped away, leaving me exposed and vulnerable. By morning, exhaustion had finally pulled me into a fitful sleep, only to be awakened by Thompson knocking on my door. "You should see this," he said grimly, leading me to a laptop set up in the main room. On the screen was surveillance footage of my apartment. Two men in dark clothing were methodically searching through my belongings, pulling out drawers and emptying my closet. "This was taken last night," Thompson explained. "They were looking for the pendant, and for any clues to where you might have gone." The reality of the danger finally sank in. This wasn't an elaborate hoax or a case of mistaken identity. Someone was indeed hunting me. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice small. "We extract the data from your pendant, use it to take down what remains of the Blackwood organization, and keep you safe until the threat is eliminated," Dana said, making it sound simple and straightforward. But as I would soon learn, nothing about this situation was going to be simple at all. 3 days at the safe house crawled by with excruciating slowness. I alternated between numbing shock, rage, and paralyzing fear. Dana and Thompson maintained constant vigilance, taking shifts to monitor the perimeter while a tech specialist named Marcus worked on extracting the data from my pendant. "The encryption is sophisticated," Marcus explained, hunched over specialized equipment he'd brought in. "Your biological father was no amateur. He built this to withstand serious attempts at cracking it." On the second day, Thompson turned on the local news. My school photo from senior year of high school filled the screen, alongside a headline, "Local woman missing, parents concerned." The camera cut to Frank and Brenda Carter standing on our front porch, looking appropriately distressed. My mother dabbed at tears with a tissue while my father spoke to reporters. "Our daughter left during dinner 3 nights ago, saying she was going to help a friend," he said, his voice breaking convincingly. "She never arrived at her friend's house, and no one has heard from her since. We're desperate for any information. Allison, if you're watching this, please come home. Whatever's going on, we can work through it together." I felt physically ill watching their performance. "They're trying to smoke me out," I realized. "Standard tactic," Thompson confirmed, turning down the volume. "Make a public appeal that puts pressure on you emotionally while also getting your face on every news outlet in the region." "They reported me missing to the actual police," I pointed out. "Won't that complicate things for whatever agency you're with?" "U.S. Marshals Service," Dana reminded me. "And yes, it complicates things, but we anticipated this move. Local authorities have been informed that there's a federal investigation involving you, though they don't know the details." Later that day, Thompson began training me in basic self-defense and emergency protocols. "If we get separated, head north until you reach the main road, then east toward the gas station we passed on the way in," he instructed as we walked the perimeter of the property. "Memorize this phone number. It's a secure line that will connect you to our operations center." As we practiced escape routes and basic defensive moves, I grew increasingly frustrated with the limited information I was receiving. "I want to know everything," I demanded that evening. "Not just bits and pieces. What exactly is on that chip? Why has a crime syndicate spent 20 years looking for it? And why am I the key to accessing it?" Thompson and Dana exchanged one of their meaningful looks before Thompson nodded. "She deserves to know." Dana sat across from me at the table. "The data on the microchip contains financial records, communications, and most importantly, a list of every high-level member of the Blackwood organization, including politicians, judges, and law enforcement officials who are on their payroll." "My father collected all this when he worked for them?" "Yes, but it wasn't just financial records. He also recorded conversations, evidence of direct criminal activity by people who've never been linked to the organization publicly. With this evidence, the Justice Department could dismantle their entire operation and prosecute dozens of corrupted officials. And I'm the key because The encryption requires biometric confirmation from a Reynolds family member, Marcus explained, joining our conversation. Your father designed it so that only he, your mother, or you could access the data. It needs your fingerprint, plus a verbal passphrase. I don't know any passphrase, I protested. You do, even if you don't realize it, Dana said. It would be something meaningful to your family, something you would remember even after your conscious memories of your early life faded. I thought about it, focusing on the few fragments of memory I had from before age 7. Nothing significant came to mind. We'll figure it out, Thompson assured me. The important thing is that you're safe, and a shrill alarm cut him off mid-sentence. Thompson immediately went for his weapon while Dana moved to the security monitors. Perimeter breach, north side, she reported tensely. 2, possibly 3 individuals. How did they find us? I asked, panic rising in my throat. Questions later, Thompson said curtly. Emergency evacuation, now. Marcus, secure the equipment. Dana, take Allison through the south exit. I'll cover. Everything happened with dizzying speed after that. Marcus shoved equipment into a bag while Dana grabbed a go-pack and hustled me toward a door I hadn't noticed before, concealed behind a bookshelf. It led to a narrow passage and another door that opened to the forest behind the cabin. Stay low, move fast, and stick close to me, Dana instructed, drawing her weapon. We'd made it about 50 yards into the forest when I heard shouting from the direction of the cabin, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Dana quickened our pace, leading me through the trees along what appeared to be a predetermined escape route. The sound of pursuit grew closer, snapping twigs and hushed voices. Dana signaled me to stop and hide behind a large fallen tree. Moments later, a man in dark tactical gear emerged from the brush about 20 yards away, scanning the forest floor for tracks. Dana motioned for me to stay down as she carefully shifted position. The man moved closer, and I could see he was holding a gun similar to Dana's. When he was about 10 feet away, Dana made her move, launching herself at him with surprising speed. They struggled briefly before the man threw Dana off, sending her weapon skittering across the ground. As he raised his gun, I acted on instinct, using the self-defense move Thompson had taught me just hours earlier. I rushed from my hiding spot and drove my shoulder into the back of the man's knees, causing him to stumble forward. Dana recovered quickly, delivering a precise strike to his wrist that made him drop his weapon, followed by a blow to his head that rendered him unconscious. Nice teamwork, she panted, retrieving both weapons. Now we really need to move. We continued our escape, eventually reaching a dirt road where a different vehicle than the one we'd arrived in was hidden under a camouflage tarp. Dana quickly uncovered it, and we sped away from the safe house. Thompson? I asked. He'll rendezvous with us at the secondary location if he can, Dana said grimly. He's been in worse situations. How did they find us? I repeated my earlier question. Dana's expression was troubled. I don't know. The safe house location was known to only a handful of agents. We may have a security breach within the Marshal's service itself. After several hours of driving, taking detours and switching vehicles twice more, we arrived at the secondary location, an underground facility disguised as a storage unit complex outside of Albany, New York. Thompson was already there, sporting a bandage on his arm but otherwise intact. Marcus had also made it out with most of the equipment. Did you recover the pendant? Was Thompson's first question. I reached under my shirt and pulled out the necklace, which I'd kept on me throughout our escape. Good, he said, visibly relieved. They hit us harder than expected. These weren't ordinary mercenaries. They had tactical training and inside knowledge of our security systems. I've been monitoring news reports, Marcus said, gesturing to a computer setup in the corner of the room. Your parents are working with the FBI to find you. At least, that's the official story. On the screen, I saw Frank and Brenda Carter standing with men in suits who were identified as FBI agents. They were announcing an expanded search for me, describing me as vulnerable and possibly suffering from delusions. They're painting me as mentally unstable, I realized. So if I try to tell anyone the truth, no one will believe you, Dana finished. It's another standard tactic. Looking at the people who had raised me, standing there and deliberately vilifying me to aid criminals, I finally accepted the full reality of my situation. The depth of their betrayal was breathtaking. I want to confront them, I said suddenly, surprising even myself with the conviction in my voice. Face to face. I want to hear them admit what they've done. Absolutely not, Thompson began, but Dana raised a hand. Actually, she said thoughtfully, that might be exactly what we need to do. You want to use me as bait, I said flatly after Dana explained her plan. We were seated around a table in the underground facility, which I'd learned was called a black site, an undocumented location used for high-risk operations. Not bait, Dana corrected. The centerpiece of a carefully orchestrated sting operation. There's a difference. Feels like semantics from where I'm sitting. Thompson, who had initially opposed the idea, now reluctantly agreed it had merit. The Carters believe you're frightened and confused. They'll expect you to eventually reach out to them, especially with the media campaign painting you as potentially unstable. If you contact them, Dana continued, expressing fear and a desire to come home, they'll see it as an opportunity to complete their original plan, delivering you to the Blackwood organization. And we'll be waiting, Thompson finished. We can finally catch them in the act and potentially identify their Blackwood contacts. The plan was risky but had clear advantages. The Carters would be arrested, eliminating the immediate threat to me. Their cooperation might lead to valuable intelligence about the Blackwood organization. And selfishly, I wanted answers that only they could provide. We'll have agents positioned throughout the meeting location, Dana assured me. You'll be wearing a wire, and we'll be listening to every word. At the first sign of danger, we move in. What if they don't take the bait? What if they suspect a trap? They won't, Thompson said confidently. Their arrogance is their weakness. They've been playing this role for 20 years and have come to believe they're untouchable. Over the next day, we carefully constructed my approach. I would call from a burner phone, sounding distraught and confused. I'd claimed that I'd been kidnapped by people claiming to be federal agents, but had managed to escape. I didn't know who to trust, but wanted to come home. Your emotional distress won't be entirely an act, Dana noted gently. Use that authenticity. When the time came to make the call, my hands trembled so badly that Thompson had to dial the number for me. The phone rang 3 times before my mother's voice answered, sounding tired and strained. Hello, Mom? I said, my voice breaking. The mixture of genuine emotion and performance made the word catch in my throat. Allison, she gasped. Oh my God, Frank. It's Allison. I heard my father's voice in the background, then the sound of an extension being picked up. Allison, where are you? Are you okay? His voice carried the perfect note of paternal concern. I don't know if I'm okay, I said, letting tears flow freely now. These people took me. They said they were federal agents, but I think they were lying. They told me terrible things about you and Dad. I managed to get away, but I'm scared. I don't know who to trust. Oh, sweetheart, my mother said soothingly. We know about these people. They've been harassing other families too. The FBI is involved now. Just tell us where you are, and we'll come get you. I'm afraid to say where I am on the phone, I replied, following our script. But I can meet you somewhere public. Tomorrow morning? That coffee shop near the library? There was a brief pause, and I could almost see them exchanging looks, recalculating their plans. Of course, my father said. 10 o'clock? Just you and us, no police. They've been making this whole situation more complicated. We just want to bring you home safely. Okay, I whispered. 10 o'clock. I'll see you then. After the call ended, I collapsed into a chair, emotionally drained. They didn't even hesitate, I said numbly. Not even a second of genuine concern. They've had years to perfect their performance, Thompson reminded me. Don't underestimate how convincing they can be in person. Remember who they really are, not who you thought they were. The next morning, I was fitted with a concealed wire and given a panic button disguised as a hair clip. Agents would be positioned throughout the coffee shop and surrounding area. Dana would be seated nearby as a customer, while Thompson would monitor from a surveillance van outside. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, Use the signal and we move in, Dana instructed, adjusting my wire one final time. The coffee shop was selected for its multiple exits and clear sight lines. I arrived 15 minutes early, ordering a latte I couldn't drink and selecting a table near the back with a clear view of the entrance. At exactly 10 o'clock, Frank and Brenda Carter walked in. They spotted me immediately, and my mother's face crumpled with what appeared to be relief. She rushed over, enveloping me in a hug that felt so familiar, so safe, that for a terrifying moment, I doubted everything Dana and Thompson had told me. "We've been so worried," she murmured, stroking my hair like she had when I was a child. My father joined us, placing a protective hand on my shoulder. "Are you hurt? Did they harm you in any way?" "No," I said, my voice small. "But they told me things, terrible things." "Let's sit," my father suggested, glancing around the coffee shop with subtle scrutiny that I might not have noticed a week ago. "You can tell us everything." As we sat, I noticed my mother position herself between me and the nearest exit. My father kept one hand free, close to his jacket pocket. These were not the movements of concerned parents, but the tactical positioning of trained agents. "They said you're not my real parents," I began, watching their reactions carefully. "That my real name is Allison Reynolds, and you were assigned to protect me as part of a witness protection program." "Oh, sweetheart," my mother said, reaching for my hand with a sad smile. "This is why we've been so worried. These people have clearly manipulated you with these bizarre stories." "They showed me my birth certificate," I continued. "Photos of my biological parents. Documentation of the witness protection program. Forgeries," my father said dismissively. "These people are con artists, Allison. They've targeted other families with similar stories. The FBI is investigating them." I pulled my hand away from my mother's. "They also showed me surveillance photos of you, Dad, meeting with men connected to something called the Blackwood Organization. They had recordings of your phone calls discussing delivering a package. A flicker of something, surprise, concern, calculation, crossed my father's face before his expression settled back into parental worry. "These are serious accusations, Allison. I think you need help, professional help. We're worried about your mental state." "Are you?" I asked, my voice hardening. "Or are you worried about the microchip hidden in the pendant you gave me? The one with evidence that could destroy the Blackwood Organization?" This time, neither could mask their reaction. My mother's face went completely blank, while my father's eyes darted to my neck where the pendant usually hung. "Where is it?" he asked, his voice suddenly cold and unfamiliar. "Safe," I replied. "Along with me, until recently. But I'm not safe with you anymore, am I? Was I ever?" My mother's transformation was chilling. The warm, concerned expression melted away, replaced by clinical assessment. "You've been talking to the marshals," she said flatly. It wasn't a question. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking despite my determination to stay strong. "You raised me. How could you betray me like this?" My father leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "You have no idea what you're involved in, Allison. The Blackwoods aren't people you can run from. They have resources, connections. The marshals can't protect you forever. And you can." I challenged. "We had a plan," he insisted. "A controlled handover. You would have been unharmed if you'd just cooperated. Now you've complicated everything by not letting you sell me to criminals." I couldn't keep the bitter incredulity from my voice. My mother glanced at her watch, then at my father. Some silent communication passed between them. "Enough talking," my father decided, standing abruptly. "You're coming with us now. We'll sort this out at home." "I'm not going anywhere with you," I said firmly. His hand clamped around my arm with bruising force. "This isn't a request, Allison." "Let go of me," I said loudly, drawing attention from nearby tables. "She's having an episode," my mother explained to the staring patrons, her concerned parent mask back in place. "Our daughter has been struggling with mental health issues." My father began pulling me toward the door, his grip painful. "Don't make a scene," he warned under his breath. "You'll only make this worse for yourself." I reached up as if to brush hair from my face and pressed the panic button in my clip. Instantly, Dana stood from her table across the room, her badge already out. "Federal agent. Let her go." Thompson and 3 other agents burst through the door, weapons drawn. U.S. Marshals. Hands where we can see them. My father froze, then made a desperate lunge, trying to pull me in front of him as a shield. I remembered Thompson's training and dropped my weight, twisting out of his grip. An agent tackled him to the ground while another secured my mother, who hadn't attempted to flee but stood watching the scene unfold with cold calculation. Within minutes, both were handcuffed and being led to separate vehicles outside. The coffee shop had been evacuated, and agents were securing the scene. "You okay?" Dana asked, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. I nodded, though okay felt like a concept from another lifetime. "I want to talk to them. Separately. Before they're processed." Dana hesitated, then nodded. "We can arrange that." They set up the confrontation at a local police station where my parents had been transported. I would speak to my mother first, then my father, with agents monitoring from behind a one-way mirror. Brenda Carter sat at a metal table, her hands cuffed in front of her. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of the maternal persona she'd worn for 20 years. Was any of it real? I asked as I sat across from her. It was the only question that mattered to me in that moment. She studied me for a long moment before answering. Parts of it, she admitted finally. In the beginning, it was just an assignment. A job. But children have a way of working into your heart, even when you're trying to maintain professional distance. Yet you were willing to hand me over to people who would have killed me. They wouldn't have killed you, she said, as if that made it better. They just wanted the evidence. Once they had it, they would have let you go. And you believe that? These people murdered witnesses and have been hunting me for 20 years, but they would have just let me walk away. She looked away. We didn't have a choice, Allison. They found us 7 years ago. Frank had made some bad investments. We were underwater financially, and they offered a way out. Just information at first. Where you were, what you were doing. Nothing that would put you in danger. Until it did put me in danger. They found out about the pendant last year, she continued, ignoring my comment. Apparently, your biological father had told someone about it before he disappeared into witness protection. After that, the stakes changed. It wasn't just about information anymore. So you plan to deliver me like a package, I said bitterly. We tried to delay, she insisted. We kept making excuses, saying the timing wasn't right. But they became impatient. They threatened us. You have to understand, Allison. Stop calling me that, I interrupted. You've admitted I'm not Allison Carter. You've admitted this was all a lie. Her face hardened. Fine. But whatever your name is, you were my daughter for 20 years. I taught you to read, bandaged your scraped knees, helped you through your first heartbreak. That counts for something. Not enough to keep you from betraying me, I replied, standing up. There was nothing more to say to this woman who was both familiar and a complete stranger. My father, Frank, was even colder in his interrogation room. There was no pretense of affection, just calculating assessment. You should have gotten in the car with us, he said when I entered. We could have worked something out. Like you worked something out with the Blackwoods? Trading me for, what, money? Protection? Both, he admitted readily. We were good agents once, but 20 years of babysitting duty takes its toll. We deserved more than a government pension for the sacrifices we made. Sacrifices? I repeated incredulously. You were given a ready-made family and a comfortable suburban life. We were given a prison, he snapped. Every move monitored, every decision scrutinized. We couldn't even take a vacation without clearance from handlers. And for what? To protect some accountant who couldn't mind his own business and his self-righteous wife. His contempt for my biological parents was palpable, and it ignited an unexpected surge of loyalty toward people I couldn't even remember. They did the right thing, I said. Unlike you. The right thing, he scoffed. Thomas Reynolds could have taken a payout like everyone else did. Instead, he had to play hero, and we got stuck with the consequences. He leaned forward, eyes cold. They'll find you, you know. The Blackwoods. They have people everywhere, police, government, even in the Marshal's service. That's how they found us at the safe house. Is that a threat? I asked, refusing to show the fear his words triggered. It's a reality check. You think this ends with us in custody? This is just the beginning. He'll never stop looking for that evidence. As I turned to leave, he called after me, "Remember who raised you, Allison. Remember who you really are." The words followed me out of the room, echoing in my mind long after I'd left the police station. Because that was the question at the heart of everything. Who was I really? 6 months later, I stood in front of a bathroom mirror in Seattle, still getting used to my reflection. The woman staring back at me had shoulder-length auburn hair instead of my natural blonde, brown contact lenses hiding my hazel eyes, and called herself Megan Brooks. My third identity. First Allison Reynolds, then Allison Carter, now Megan Brooks. Each one felt like a costume I was wearing rather than a person I was being. After the arrests of Frank and Brenda Carter, things had moved quickly. The data extracted from my pendant, accessed using my fingerprint and the passphrase "Midnight Fireflies," which apparently referenced a memory from my early childhood, had proven even more valuable than anticipated. It contained not just financial records and conversations, but videos, photographs, and detailed accounts of criminal activities spanning decades. The Justice Department had launched multiple investigations, resulting in dozens of arrests, including high-ranking officials who had been secretly working with the Blackwood organization. But as Frank had warned, the organization's reach was extensive, and the threat to me remained significant. Hence, Megan Brooks, a completely new identity in a city I'd never visited before, with a job as a content writer for a tech company that was aware of my special circumstances, but not the details. I had a modest apartment in the Ballard neighborhood, a weekly check-in with Agent Dana Winters, who had become my handler and, increasingly, my friend, and twice-weekly sessions with Dr. Patterson, a therapist specializing in trauma and identity issues. "How are you settling in?" Dr. Patterson asked during our session that morning. "Fine," I said automatically, then caught myself. One of our agreements was that I would try to be honest rather than saying what I thought people wanted to hear. A habit developed from years of unconsciously performing the role of Allison Carter. "Actually, it's still strange," I amended. "I keep forgetting to respond when someone calls me Megan. I reach for my old ID when I'm asked for identification. I almost signed an email with Allison yesterday." "That's normal," Dr. Patterson assured me. "Identity is deeply ingrained. It takes time to adjust to such a fundamental change." "But which identity am I adjusting from?" I asked, voicing the question that haunted me. I lived as Allison Carter for 20 years, but that was a fabrication. Allison Reynolds existed for only 7 years, and I barely remember her. Is Megan Brooks just another role I'm playing? "I think that's the central question you're here to explore," Dr. Patterson said thoughtfully. "Who are you beneath the names and circumstances? What core self remains consistent regardless of what you're called or where you live?" It was a question I wrestled with daily. In some ways, starting fresh in Seattle had been liberating. I no longer felt the pressure to live up to Frank and Brenda's expectations. I could define myself on my own terms. But there was also a profound loneliness in being disconnected from my past, both pasts. After my session, I met Dana at a coffee shop near my apartment, one of our regular check-in locations that we rotated for security purposes. "How's the job going?" she asked after we'd ordered. "It's good. Challenging enough to keep me engaged, but not so demanding that I can't handle it with everything else going on." I stirred my latte absently. "Any news?" Dana knew what I was asking. Any news about the Carters, about the Blackwood organization, about my biological parents. Frank and Brenda both received 15-year sentences for conspiracy and other charges, she reported. They're in separate federal facilities. Neither has offered any cooperation since their initial processing. I nodded, having expected as much. "And the Blackwoods?" "Major progress there. The evidence from your pendant led to the arrest of Gregory Blackwood's son, who had been running the organization from the shadows. We've identified most of their network, though some associates remain at large." "Enough to keep me as Megan Brooks indefinitely?" Dana's expression was sympathetic but firm. "For the foreseeable future, yes." "The threat assessment hasn't changed." I sighed, having anticipated this answer as well. "And my biological parents?" At this, Dana's expression softened slightly. That's actually why I wanted to meet in person today. I have confirmation that they're alive and well. They've been living under new identities in Australia for the past decade. My heart leaped. Can I contact them? Not yet, Dana said gently. Their security protocols are even more stringent than yours. But they've been informed that you're safe and that the evidence your father secured has finally been put to use. They've expressed a strong desire to reconnect when it's safe to do so. It wasn't much, but it was something, a thread connecting me to a past I couldn't remember, but that was authentically mine. In the meantime, Dana continued, sliding a newspaper across the table. You might be interested in this. It was the national section of the Washington Post. The headline read, Major Crime Syndicate Dismantled, Decades of Corruption Exposed. The article detailed how evidence from a 20-year-old case had led to the arrests of numerous officials and the freezing of billions in assets tied to illegal activities. They can't name you for security reasons, Dana explained, but that's the impact of your pendant. Your biological father's evidence finally accomplished what he intended. For the first time in months, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. Whatever else was uncertain in my life, this was something tangible, proof that the upheaval had served a greater purpose. That evening, I joined a support group for victims of identity theft and fraud. While my situation was unique, the emotional impact of having your identity violated resonated with everyone there. We met in a community center downtown, sharing stories and coping strategies without delving into specifics that might compromise anyone's security. The hardest part, I shared during my turn to speak, is feeling like I don't have a solid foundation. Like I'm building a house on shifting sand. Heads nodded in understanding. A woman named Claire spoke up after my experience. I had to accept that identity isn't just what's on paper or what others perceive. It's what you carry inside, your values, your choices, your responses to challenges. That's what my therapist says, I acknowledged with a small smile. Smart therapist, Claire replied, returning the smile. After the meeting, I walked home through light Seattle rain, reflecting on Claire's words. What did I carry inside that remained consistent through all these changes? My apartment was small but comfortable, decorated with new items that held no memories or associations with my previous lives. The only exception was a small sketch I'd drawn of my childhood home in Connecticut. Not out of nostalgia for the Carters, but as acknowledgement that those years had shaped me, for better or worse. As I made tea, my neighbor Tyler knocked on my door. He was a graphic designer who lived across the hall, friendly but not intrusive, with a quick smile and an easy manner that put me at ease despite my general wariness of new people. Hey, he greeted me. A package for you was delivered to my apartment by mistake. He held out a small box. Thanks, I said, taking it. Do you want to come in for tea? I just made some. The invitation surprised me as much as it seemed to surprise him. Part of my security protocol was maintaining polite distance from neighbors. But something about the support group discussion had left me craving normal human connection. Sure, Tyler said after a moment's hesitation. I'd like that. Over tea, we talked about inconsequential things, a new restaurant in the neighborhood, an upcoming arts festival, his latest design project. It was refreshingly ordinary, with no hidden agendas or life or death stakes. After he left, I opened the package he'd delivered. Inside was a small potted plant with a note from Dana, something living that can put down roots anywhere. I placed the plant on my windowsill, oddly touched by the gesture. That night, I wrote in the journal Dr. Patterson had suggested I keep, 6 months as Megan Brooks. Still feels strange, but maybe less so than last month. I wonder if I'll ever feel settled in any identity again, or if that's even the goal. Maybe the point isn't to find solid ground, but to learn to dance on shifting sands. Tyler from across the hall came over for tea today. First social interaction that wasn't therapy, support group, or Dana in weeks. It felt good to just be a person having tea with another person, with no mention of witness protection or trauma or new identities. Dana confirmed my biological parents are alive in Australia. Someday maybe I'll meet them. Will they recognize anything of themselves in me? Will I recognize anything of myself in them? Asterisk the evidence Dad collected finally did what it was supposed to do. Whatever else happens, that matters. Asterisk Claire from group said something that stuck with me. Identity isn't just external labels, but what you carry inside. What do I carry? Resilience, apparently. Adaptability. A stubborn desire for truth, even when it hurts. A capacity for starting over that I never knew I had. Asterisk, maybe that's enough foundation to build on for now. Asterisk the next morning, I watered my new plant and opened my curtains to let in the Pacific Northwest light. So different from Connecticut sunshine, but beautiful in its own way. My phone pinged with a news alert, another arrest connected to the Blackwood case. I thought about Frank's final warning to me. They'll never stop looking for that evidence. He had meant it as a threat, but it had become something else entirely. The evidence had found its purpose, and the organization that had haunted my family for decades was crumbling. As I prepared for work, I practiced introducing myself in the mirror. Hi, I'm Megan Brooks. The name still felt foreign on my tongue, but perhaps less so than yesterday. Identity, I was learning, wasn't a fixed point, but a continuum. Allison Reynolds, Allison Carter, Megan Brooks. Each was a chapter in my story, not the whole book. The woman who had survived all three was still emerging, still discovering her own contours and capabilities. For now, that was enough, that, and the small plant putting down new roots on my windowsill, the morning light illuminating possibilities I couldn't yet imagine, and the knowledge that somewhere across the world, two people who shared my blood were hoping to one day know the woman their daughter had become. I wasn't defined by the people who had betrayed me or even by those who had protected me. I was defined by how I had faced the unimaginable and found a way forward. That was something no new name or location could take away. As I headed out into the Seattle morning, I felt something shift inside me, not a dramatic transformation, but a subtle realignment, like a compass finally finding north after spinning wildly for months. I didn't know if I would ever feel completely at home as Megan Brooks. I didn't know if I would ever meet my biological parents or if the threat from the remaining Blackwood associates would ever fully disappear. But I knew that beneath all the layers of identity and deception, I had found something authentic, a core self that could withstand whatever came next. And that, I was beginning to understand, was the most valuable identity of all. What would you do if your entire life turned out to be a fabrication? Have you ever experienced a moment where everything you thought you knew was suddenly called into question? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Remember, sometimes our greatest strengths emerge from our most challenging moments. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it inspires you to discover your own authentic self, regardless of the name you answer to. Until next time, this is Megan Brooks. Or whoever I truly am, signing off. My name is Cassandra Miller, 29 years old, and I never expected my cousin's lavish Boston wedding to be the place where everything changed. I was fixing my bridesmaid dress in the hallway when I overheard my father's voice. "She's just a security guard," he told his colleagues with that familiar, disappointed tone. The words stung like they always did, but he had no idea what would happen in the next 24 hours. Or that his just a security guard daughter would end up all over the news. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like and subscribe button, and let me know if your family has ever completely misjudged who you really are. Growing up in the Miller household meant living with sky-high expectations. Our colonial-style home in Wellesley, Massachusetts, housed a family of overachievers led by my father, Thomas Miller, a corporate attorney whose client list included half the Fortune 500 companies in Boston. My mother, Amanda, was equally impressive as one of the top cardiothoracic surgeons at Massachusetts General Hospital. Their wedding photos showed two people who looked like they belonged on a magazine cover. Both brilliant, beautiful, and from families where excellence wasn't just encouraged, it was the baseline. My older brother James took after my father in every way possible. From his analytical mind to his impeccable fashion sense, he was the perfect heir to the Miller legal legacy. By the time I was in high school, James was already at Harvard Law, following directly in our father's footsteps. When family friends would visit, my parents would parade James's accomplishments like prize trophies, his LSAT scores, his internship at the state attorney's office, the law review articles he'd published. The pride in my father's voice was unmistakable. Then there was my younger sister, Catherine, Katie to the family, who was my mother's medical protege. Even in high school, she could recite complex anatomical terms and would spend weekends shadowing our mother at the hospital. She had our mother's delicate hands and steady nerves, perfect for the surgical career that everyone knew was her destiny. While other teenagers were at the mall, Katie was taking advanced biology courses and volunteering in medical clinics. And then there was me, Cassandra, Cassie to everyone except my father, who insisted on using my full name. I wasn't unambitious or unintelligent. I consistently made the honor roll and captained the track team. But my interests diverged from the Miller family tradition of medicine and law. In my sophomore year of high school, we had a career day where a former FBI agent spoke about security work. Something clicked inside me that day: the systematic approach to protection, the psychological aspects of threat assessment, the balance of physical and mental skills required. When I shared my newfound interest at dinner that night, my father chuckled as if I'd told a joke. "Security is what people do when they can't get into law school, Cassandra," he said, passing the potatoes without looking up. My mother at least tried to be supportive in her own way. "Honey, with your grades, you could do so much more. Maybe forensic psychology if you're interested in that sort of thing." But I was stubborn, another Miller family trait. Throughout high school, I focused on developing skills that no one else in my family valued. While James memorized legal precedents and Katie studied cellular biology, I took self-defense classes, studied surveillance techniques, and read everything I could about threat assessment and security protocols. I joined the school's ROTC program, which my parents tolerated only because it looked good on college applications. My physical abilities developed alongside my analytical skills. I could run 5 miles without breaking a sweat, bench press more than most guys on the football team, and had reflexes that my coaches called uncanny. But these weren't achievements that earned space on the Miller family brag wall, where diplomas and academic awards were displayed like masterpieces in a museum. The real breaking point came during my senior year when college decisions had to be made. The family expectation was clear. I would apply to Ivy League schools and pursue either pre-law or pre-med. I applied to those schools to appease my parents, but also to several universities with strong criminal justice programs. When my acceptance letter from Northeastern University arrived with a partial scholarship to their criminal justice program, I was ecstatic. My parents were not. Criminal justice? My father's voice filled our kitchen, making the crystal glasses in the cabinet vibrate slightly. "That's a degree for people who want to be police officers, Cassandra. What's wrong with that?" I challenged, feeling my face flush. "We didn't put you through private school your entire life so you could walk a beat in a dangerous neighborhood," my mother interjected, her surgical precision evident even in how she cut me down. "This isn't about being a police officer," I tried explaining. "There are corporate security positions, private security firms, government agencies." "Blue-collar work," my father interrupted. "The Millers aren't blue-collar people." That conversation marked the first major fracture in my relationship with my parents. Despite their disapproval, I accepted Northeastern's offer. James tried to mediate, suggesting I could always transfer to pre-law after a year, while Katie remained Switzerland neutral, unwilling to risk her golden child status. The day I moved into my college dorm, my father helped carry my boxes with rigid politeness. As he was leaving, he handed me a credit card connected to the family account. "Your mother and I still expect excellence, Cassandra," he said formally. "Just because we disagree with your choices doesn't mean we won't support you financially. You're still a Miller." I recognized it for what it was: not just financial support, but a lingering tether, a reminder that despite my rebellion, I was still expected to uphold the family name somehow. What he didn't realize was that I absolutely intended to uphold the Miller standard of excellence, just not in a field he respected. Throughout my college years, the emotional distance between my parents and me grew into a chasm. Holiday dinners became exercises in polite conversation about everything except my studies or future plans. When relatives asked about me, my father would quickly change the subject to James's clerkship with a federal judge or Katie's early acceptance to medical school. I became the family footnote, the asterisk in the otherwise perfect Miller narrative. But with each security course I aced, each training certification I earned, and each professor who recognized my natural aptitude for the field, I became more certain I'd chosen the right path. Even if it was one my family couldn't understand or appreciate. By graduation day, when I received my bachelor's degree in criminal justice with a specialization in security studies, the gap had calcified into something seemingly permanent. My parents attended the ceremony and took the obligatory photos, but the pride that had been so evident at James's and Katie's graduations was noticeably absent. In its place was a resigned acceptance that their middle child had chosen a path they considered beneath her potential and beneath the Miller name. Little did they know that I was just getting started. My first job after college wasn't exactly glamorous, and it played right into my father's preconceived notions. I became a security guard at the Prudential Center Mall in downtown Boston, patrolling retail floors in a polyester uniform that felt like a Halloween costume of what my parents feared I'd become. The starting salary was barely enough to afford my tiny studio apartment in Allston, and I had to fight against my pride to keep using the family credit card for groceries and essentials. The first time my parents visited my apartment, my mother looked around with thinly veiled horror at the efficiency kitchen and futon that doubled as my bed. My father noticed the security uniform hanging on my closet door and pressed his lips together in that way that always preceded disappointment. "You know, Cassandra," he said carefully, "James could help you get a paralegal position at his firm. The starting salary is twice what you're making, and it could lead to law school if you applied yourself." "I'm applying myself right now, Dad," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. "Just not in the direction you want." He sighed, looking tired. Security guard. It's just hard to tell our friends that our daughter, who graduated with honors, is watching mall shoppers for shoplifting. What my father didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that the mall position was merely a starting point. Security, like medicine or law, has hierarchies and specializations. You don't begin as a neurosurgeon or a senior partner, you work your way up. My breakthrough came 3 months into my mall job when I noticed a pattern of high-end merchandise disappearing from stores during specific shift changes. Instead of just reporting it, I compiled data, established a timeline, and identified a suspect. One of the janitorial staff who had access to service corridors. When I presented my findings to the head of security, he was impressed enough to introduce me to someone who would change my career trajectory. Sergeant Frank Reynolds was a retired police detective who now ran security for several financial institutions in Boston. Square-jawed with salt and pepper hair and hands that looked like they could bend steel, he had the calm confidence that comes from decades of experience. After reviewing my work on the mall theft case, he offered me a position on his team at Commonwealth Trust Bank. "You've got good instincts, kid," he told me in his gravelly Boston accent. "Most of these young guards are just collecting a paycheck, but you've got the eye. I can teach skills, but I can't teach that." Under Frank's mentorship, I flourished. I learned advanced surveillance techniques, threat assessment protocols, and the psychological aspects of security that had fascinated me since high school. Frank became the professional father figure my own father had refused to be, praising my aptitude while pushing me to improve. "You're not just a security guard," he'd tell me. "You're a security professional. There's a difference." I soaked up everything Frank taught me, earning certifications in advanced threat assessment, emergency response, and executive protection. When Frank recommended me for specialized training with former military and law enforcement personnel, I took unpaid leave to attend, living on ramen noodles for weeks to afford it. My family remained largely uninterested in these developments. At Thanksgiving dinner, while James discussed his first major case win and Katie detailed a complicated surgical procedure she'd assisted with, I tried to share my experience providing security for a visiting foreign dignitary at the bank. "That's nice, honey," my mother said, clearly not listening. James, tell us more about that class action suit. I stopped sharing my professional life with them after that. If they weren't interested in my successes, they didn't deserve to know about them. 2 years into my bank security position, I had built a reputation among Boston's private security community as someone with exceptional observational skills and quick thinking. When an incident occurred, an attempted robbery that I thwarted by noticing behavioral indicators before the perpetrator even drew his weapon, it caught the attention of people beyond my immediate circle. An email arrived from Griffin Elite Security, a firm so prestigious in security circles that it was essentially the equivalent of a white shoe law firm in my father's world. They specialized in high-level executive protection, cybersecurity integration, and threat assessment for corporations and individuals with assets worth protecting. Their client list was confidential, but rumor had it they protected tech billionaires, visiting royalty, and diplomats during sensitive negotiations. The recruitment process was grueling: physical tests, psychological evaluations, scenario simulations, and technical assessments that pushed me to my limits. When the offer finally came, the salary was nearly triple what I was making at the bank, with benefits that included international travel, specialized training, and the opportunity to work with the best security professionals in the business. I accepted immediately but made a decision that would ultimately lead to the wedding incident. I told my family nothing about the prestigious nature of my new position. When they asked about my job change, I simply said I'd moved to another security company. My father assumed lateral movement, perhaps from one shopping mall to another, and I didn't correct him. This created the double life I maintained for the next 3 years. To my family, I remained just a security guard with a blue-collar job beneath their professional standards. But in reality, I became a senior security consultant specializing in risk assessment and personal protection for high-profile clients. I traveled to Dubai with tech executives, secured meetings between corporate leaders in Singapore, and developed security protocols for events hosting some of the most influential people in the world. My colleagues at Griffin Elite became my second family, people who respected my abilities and valued my contributions. Adrian Parker, the firm's operations director, became a close friend and mentor. A former Secret Service agent with short silver hair and impeccable pantsuits, she recognized potential in me that even Frank had missed. "You have a unique ability to blend in," she told me once after I'd successfully managed security for a sensitive corporate merger meeting. "Most security people stand out, they want to be seen as protection. But you can disappear into a crowd while seeing everything. That's rare and valuable." Under Adrienne's guidance, I developed a specialty in covert protection, security that doesn't look like security. I could attend black tie events as a guest, monitor a situation while appearing to be merely enjoying champagne, and step in only when necessary. This skill would prove particularly valuable at my cousin's wedding, though I had no way of knowing that then. As my professional reputation grew, so did the gap between my actual career and my family's perception of it. At Christmas gatherings and birthday dinners, I'd listen to James discuss his partnership track and Katie's residency stories while keeping silent about protecting a famous actress from a stalker or developing security for a controversial political conference. "And what about you, Cassandra?" my father would eventually ask, obligation rather than interest driving the question. "Still with that security company?" "Yes," I'd answer simply. "Still with Griffin Elite." The name meant nothing to him. If he'd ever Googled the company, he would have discovered its prestigious reputation, but he never bothered. In his mind, I remained the family disappointment who watched store monitors and escorted shoplifters to mall exits. Sometimes I wondered why I maintained the charade. Part of it was pride. I wanted them to value my work without the external validation of a prestigious company name. Part was resentment. After years of dismissing my career choice, why should they get to suddenly approve when they realized its actual status? And part was self-protection. Their disapproval had stopped hurting once I stopped expecting their approval. I might have continued this parallel existence indefinitely if not for my cousin Natalie's wedding and the chain of events it set in motion. The Fairmont Copley Plaza in Boston is the kind of hotel where the doormen wear top hats and white gloves, where crystal chandeliers reflect off marble floors, and where Boston's elite have celebrated special occasions for generations. It was exactly the kind of venue my Aunt Diane would choose for her only daughter's wedding, a place that screamed old money and social standing, perfect for the union of two prominent Boston families. My cousin Natalie had always been kind to me, even after the family narrative of poor Cassie and her security guard job had taken hold. When her embossed wedding invitation arrived requesting my presence for the entire weekend of festivities, I suspected she'd included me in the bridal party more from family obligation than genuine closeness. Nevertheless, I took a rare weekend off from Griffin Elite and packed my bridesmaid dress. A surprisingly tasteful emerald green silk that complemented my dark hair and pale skin. I arrived Friday afternoon for the rehearsal dinner, checking into my hotel room with a professional's eye, noting exits, security camera placements, and staff patterns automatically. It was a habit I couldn't switch off anymore, much like how my father probably assessed every social gathering for networking potential, or my mother likely noticed the vascular health of people's hands when shaking them. The first family encounter happened in the hotel lobby as I wheeled my suitcase toward the elevators. My mother spotted me first, waving with the controlled enthusiasm she reserved for public settings. "Cassandra, darling." She air-kissed near both my cheeks, careful not to smudge her perfect makeup. At 58, she remained striking, her blonde hair professionally colored to hide any gray, her surgeon's posture impeccable. "We just arrived ourselves. Your father's checking in." My father approached, handing a bellhop his premium luggage. He'd added more gray at his temples since I'd last seen him at Easter, but his tailored suit and confident stride projected the same authority he'd always carried. "Cassandra," he nodded, squeezing my shoulder briefly, his version of a warm greeting. "Good to see you made it. James and Sophia are arriving later. Their nanny was running late. And Katie's coming straight from her shift at the hospital." Of course, he'd immediately update me on my siblings. James now had a perfect wife and two perfect children to add to his perfect legal career. Katie was thriving in her surgical residency. The Miller success stories needed to be established right away. "How's work?" my mother asked with the polite disinterest of someone asking about the weather. "Busy," I replied simply. "We've had some interesting projects recently." "Still with that security company?" my father asked, checking his watch. "What was it called again?" "Griffin Elite," I answered, knowing the name meant nothing to him. "Well," he said with forced brightness, "at least it's steady employment in this economy." The condescension stung, but I'd grown accustomed to it. Before I could respond, my Aunt Diane swept into the lobby, clipboard in hand and wedding coordinator trailing behind her. "Thomas." "Amanda," she called, then noticed me. "And Cassie." "Wonderful, you're here. Natalie will be so pleased." We're gathering in the Renaissance Room at 5 for the rehearsal. The afternoon continued in a blur of wedding preparations, family arrivals, and the careful social choreography that accompanies such events. Throughout it all, I maintained my role as dutiful bridesmaid while fielding the usual questions from relatives I rarely saw. "Security? Still doing that? How interesting. Have you thought about going back to school for something else? Is there advancement in that field, dear?" Each question carried the subtext, "When will you get a real career like the rest of the Millers?" The rehearsal dinner was held in a private dining room at the hotel's restaurant. Crystal clinked against fine china as waiters poured expensive wine and served delicate portions of perfectly prepared food. I was seated at a table with other bridesmaids and groomsmen, thankfully away from my immediate family, though close enough to observe them. My father was in his element, surrounded by other successful professionals. From my position, I could see him gesturing animatedly as he spoke to a small group of men in expensive suits, colleagues or friends of the groom's family, perhaps. I wouldn't have paid attention except that I heard him mention my name. "My daughter Cassandra?" "Yes, she's here, one of the bridesmaids," he was saying to a distinguished older man with a bow tie. "James is our attorney. He's with Robertson and Schmidt now. And Catherine is finishing her surgical residency at Mass General." "And your other daughter?" the man prompted. "What does she do?" There was a microsecond of hesitation before my father replied with a dismissive wave of his hand. "She's just a security guard. You know how it is, not everyone can follow the family tradition." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not the fact that he described my job incorrectly, I was used to that. But the just before it, and the apologetic tone, as if my career choice was something that required an explanation or excuse. I set down my fork, appetite gone. Across the room, my mother caught my eye, and something in my expression must have told her I'd overheard. She at least had the decency to look momentarily uncomfortable before turning back to her conversation. After dinner, while guests mingled with drinks, I stepped out onto the terrace for air. I was surprised when my father joined me a few minutes later, scotch in hand. "Beautiful venue," he commented, looking out at the Boston skyline. "Diane has outdone herself." "It's lovely," I agreed stiffly. A moment of silence stretched between us before I decided to address what I'd heard. "I'm not just anything, Dad," I said quietly. He turned, his expression confused before understanding dawned. "You heard that?" "I didn't mean anything by it, Cassandra." "You've been dismissing my career for years," I continued, keeping my voice level. "Would it kill you to show a fraction of the pride you have for James and Katie?" My father sighed, swirling his scotch. "It's not about pride. We just had different expectations for you. You're smart, capable. You could have been anything." "I am something," I countered. "Just because it's not what you wanted doesn't make it worthless." "I never said worthless," he defended. "Security is necessary work. Someone has to do it. And that someone is me. By choice. Because I'm good at it." He nodded absently, clearly not really hearing me. "Of course you are. You're a miller. You'd be good at whatever you applied yourself to. I just wish you'd applied yourself to something more substantial." The conversation was going nowhere, as it always did. My father couldn't see past his narrow definition of success, and I was tired of trying to make him understand. "I need to get back inside," I said finally. "Natalie will be looking for the bridesmaids." As I turned to leave, my father called after me, "We just want what's best for you, Cassandra." I paused, but didn't turn around. "No, Dad. You want what looks best to other people." I rejoined the party, plastering on a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Tomorrow was Natalie's big day, and despite my hurt feelings, I wouldn't let family tension ruin her wedding. What I didn't realize was that the wedding would end up being eventful in ways none of us could have anticipated. Wedding day dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect early autumn day that makes Boston magical, crisp air, golden sunshine, and the public garden across from the hotel ablaze with fall colors. As a bridesmaid, my morning was scheduled down to the minute. Hair appointment at 8 o'clock, makeup at 9:30, mimosas and light brunch with the bridal party at 10:45, photos at noon, ceremony at 2 o'clock. By 11:30, with my hair swept into an elegant updo and my makeup professionally applied, I had a rare moment of downtime while Natalie had her final dress fitting. Rather than remain in the bridal suite with the other chattering bridesmaids, I decided to take a quick walk through the hotel lobby to clear my head after the previous night's tense exchange with my father. The Fairmont was buzzing with activity, not just for Natalie's wedding, but for what appeared to be at least 2 other events. Hotel security was visible but discreet, with earpieces and subtle uniforms that blended with the luxury surroundings. Normally, I would have appreciated their professionalism, but something in the lobby caught my trained eye. A man in a hotel uniform was wheeling a cart of champagne across the marble floor, standard for a busy wedding day. But his collar was wrong, slightly askew in a way that suggested the uniform was new or borrowed. His shoes, partially visible beneath his pants, were high-end Italian leather, not the practical footwear of someone on their feet all day. Most tellingly, he kept touching his ear as if listening to something, but he wore no visible earpiece like the actual hotel staff. I slowed my pace, casually taking a seat in a lobby armchair that offered a good vantage point. Over the next 10 minutes, I observed the man make 3 trips through the lobby, each time with different service equipment, each time scanning the room in a pattern that wasn't casual, but methodical. When he disappeared down a service corridor, I noticed another man, this one in a guest suit rather than a uniform, following the same skin pattern from near the reception desk. My professional instincts hummed with warning. This wasn't random, it was surveillance. Someone was casing the hotel, likely targeting one of the wealthy events taking place. I debated my options: alert hotel security with what was, admittedly, just a professional hunch? Call Griffin Elite for a consult? Or handle it myself? The decision was made for me when I spotted a third person, a woman in a housekeeping uniform with the same incongruent details, exchange a nearly imperceptible nod with the suited man. I recognized the team dynamic immediately. This was a coordinated operation. I pulled out my phone and texted Adrian at Griffin at Fairmont Copley for family wedding. Observing potential team of 3+ conducting pre-operational surveillance. Professional quality. Worth running names through database. Her response came quickly. Send pics if possible. We'll check known individuals targeting high-end events in Boston area. Using my phone's camera, I discreetly took photos of the 3 suspects, making it appear as though I was checking social media or taking selfies. I sent them to Adrian and returned to the bridal suite, my mind now split between bridesmaid duties and security concerns. 20 minutes later, as I was helping Natalie with her veil, my phone buzzed. Adrian's message made my stomach drop. Confirmed. Thomas Ward's crew. High-end jewelry thieves. Hit 3 society weddings in NYC last month. Stealing family heirlooms, wedding gifts. Very sophisticated. Local police notified, but evidence insufficient for immediate response. Can you maintain surveillance until we get someone there? ETA 45 minutes. I glanced at Natalie, radiant in her designer gown, pearls that had belonged to her grandmother adorning her neck. Around the room, other bridesmaids were putting on family jewelry pieces, diamonds, sapphires, heirlooms worth tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. The wedding gifts displayed in an adjacent room included antique silver, crystal, and other valuables. Will do, I texted back. Ceremony starts in 2 hours. We'll delay if necessary. Do not engage, Adrian warned. These people are professionals. Ward himself has assault charges. Under normal circumstances, I would have followed that directive. But these weren't normal circumstances. This was my family's event being targeted, and waiting 45 minutes might be too late. I excused myself again, claiming I needed to check on the flower arrangements. Once in the hallway, I kicked off my heels and moved quickly to the service elevator, using my room key card to override the staff-only restriction, a trick Frank had taught me years ago that worked on most hotel systems. In the back corridors of the hotel, I moved efficiently, checking storage rooms and service areas. In a linen closet on the ballroom level, I found what I was looking for. Evidence of their preparation. A hotel luggage cart had been modified with hidden compartments, perfect for quickly loading and removing valuable items during the chaos of a wedding reception. As I was examining it, I heard footsteps approaching. I slipped behind a rack of tablecloths just as the door opened and the false waiter entered, now accompanied by a 4th person I hadn't seen before. A tall, lean man with a thin scar along his jawline who moved with the confident ease of someone in charge. Thomas Ward himself, I realized. The notorious jewel thief whose crew had stolen millions in valuables from society events across the country. Timelines moved up, Ward was saying quietly. Security change at 3:30 instead of 4 o'clock. We go during the ceremony, not the reception. Less witnesses, more time with the gifts before they're missed. What about the family jewels? The fake waiter asked. The bride's wearing the target pieces. Amy will handle it, Ward replied. Bridesmaid emergency. Spilled drink, torn dress. Something to get her alone. She knows what to do. They were planning to target Natalie directly. My cousin on her wedding day. They left and I waited 30 seconds before slipping out of the closet. I had less than an hour before they would make their move. Not enough time for Griffin backup to arrive. I texted Adrian again with the updated information and made a decision. I wouldn't let them ruin Natalie's wedding. I wouldn't let them steal family heirlooms and gifts. And I wouldn't wait for backup. Returning to the bridal suite, I pulled aside Natalie's mother, my Aunt Diane. There's a security situation, I said quietly. Nothing to panic about, but I need you to move all the wedding gifts to a secure location immediately. Say there's been a change of plans for the display. Aunt Diane blinked in confusion. What are you talking about, Cassie? Please trust me, I insisted. I work in high-level security. There are professional thieves targeting the wedding. They're planning to steal the gifts during the ceremony and possibly Natalie's jewelry as well. To her credit, Aunt Diane didn't dismiss me outright. Are you serious? Should we call the police? They've been notified, but they won't arrive in time. I have colleagues coming, but for now, we need to secure the valuables without causing panic. Perhaps it was my tone or the confidence with which I spoke, but Aunt Diane nodded. What do you need me to do? Have the gifts moved to the hotel vault immediately. Tell the bridesmaids to leave any valuable jewelry in the hotel safe, not in the suite. And don't let Natalie be alone with any hotel staff we haven't personally verified. As Aunt Diane went to handle the gifts, I made another quick call to a Griffin Elite colleague who lived in Boston, explaining the situation. He promised to be there in 20 minutes, still cutting it close, but better than nothing. I returned to my bridesmaid duties, helping Natalie with last-minute preparations while keeping a vigilant eye on everyone entering the suite. When a housekeeping staff member, the woman I'd identified earlier, knocked with fresh towels, I intercepted her at the door. We're all set, thank you, I said pleasantly but firmly, blocking her view of Natalie. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, professional recognition passing between us. She knew I'd made her. She nodded and withdrew, but not before I noticed her hand move subtly toward her waistband, possibly reaching for a weapon. The ceremony time approached. As we lined up to process into the ballroom, I positioned myself to keep Natalie in sight at all times. My Griffin colleague texted that he had arrived and was monitoring the hallways and gift area. The wedding proceeded beautifully. Natalie looked radiant walking down the aisle to her groom, the string quartet played Pachelbel perfectly, and the afternoon sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the marble floor. I should have been focused on the romantic moment, but my attention was split, scanning constantly for Ward's crew. I spotted the fake waiter positioned near a service entrance, speaking into what appeared to be a hotel radio but was likely communication with his team. The woman who had tried to enter our suite was now dressed as a photographer's assistant, moving around the edges of the room. Ward himself was nowhere to be seen, which concerned me most of all. As the minister began the vows, I noticed a subtle shift in the fake waiter's posture, a preparation to move. Without drawing attention, I slipped from my bridesmaid position and moved toward the side of the room, as if headed to the restroom. I was halfway there when I saw it, Ward himself emerging from behind a decorative screen, moving purposefully toward the now empty bridal suite where the bridesmaids' purses and personal items remained. Despite the gifts being secured, there were still valuables to be taken. I followed, maintaining distance, watching as he used some kind of electronic device to override the key card lock. As he slipped inside, I texted my colleague his location and approached the door. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds. I entered to find Ward rifling through the bridesmaids' belongings, a small bag already filled with jewelry and electronics. Hotel security, I said calmly. I'm going to need you to put those down. Ward turned, surprise quickly replaced by cold calculation on his face. No, you're not security, he said, his voice eerily calm. You're with the wedding. The bridesmaid who's been watching us. He moved toward me, reaching again to his waistband. I didn't wait to see if he was armed. Years of training took over. As he lunged, I sidestepped, using his momentum against him. A quick strike to his solar plexus doubled him over, and I followed with a precise hit to the nerve bundle in his shoulder. Ward dropped to his knees, and I had him in a joint lock before he could recover, using a bridesmaid's curling iron cord to secure his wrists. The door burst open, and my Griffin colleague entered, followed by 2 actual hotel security guards who had finally been alerted to the situation. Perfect timing, I said dryly. His team includes at least 3 others. The waiter by the east entrance, the photographer's assistant, and likely a 4th person we haven't identified. My colleague nodded, already coordinating with hotel security through his earpiece. Within minutes, the entire team had been apprehended and real police were on their way. By the time I returned to the ceremony, the couple was being pronounced husband and wife. No one in the wedding party had noticed my brief absence, and the guests remained blissfully unaware of the drama that had unfolded. As everyone applauded the newlyweds' first kiss, I caught my Aunt Diane's questioning look from the front row. I gave her a subtle nod and watched relief wash over her face. Crisis averted. Wedding saved. What I didn't realize was that a hotel security camera had captured my takedown of Thomas Ward. Or that by morning, that footage would be playing on every local news station in Boston. I woke the next morning to my phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. Bleary-eyed and still exhausted from the previous day's events, I swiped open my screen to find dozens of missed calls, text messages, and social media alerts. Most puzzling were texts from Griffin Elite colleagues I rarely heard from, all variations of "nice work" and "you're famous." Confused, I opened a link that Adrian had sent with the message, "Cat's out of the bag, Cassie. Might want to prepare your family." The link took me to a Boston news station's website, where the headline made my stomach drop: "Society Wedding Saved by Undercover Security Expert, Notorious Jewel Thief Captured." The accompanying video, clearly taken from the hotel's security feed, showed me in my emerald bridesmaid dress taking down Thomas Ward with professional precision. Though my face was partially obscured from the camera angle, anyone who knew me would recognize me instantly. The article identified me as an undercover operative from Griffin Elite Security, one of the nation's most prestigious private security firms, who happened to be attending the wedding. A quote from Boston Police Department's Lieutenant Rodriguez praised the quick thinking and exceptional training of the security professional who prevented what could have been a theft of hundreds of thousands of dollars in family heirlooms and wedding gifts. I sat up in bed, fully awake now. This wasn't how I'd planned for my family to discover the truth about my career. For years, I'd maintained the fiction of being just a security guard, partly out of resentment, partly from pride. Now that careful deception had been shattered by a viral security video and a slow news day in Boston. As if on cue, my phone rang with my mother's ringtone. I took a deep breath and answered. "Cassandra? Are you watching the news?" Her voice held an unfamiliar tone. Something between confusion and shock. "I just saw it, Mom. Your father and I are in the hotel restaurant. Could you come down and explain what's going on?" The Fairmont's restaurant was buzzing with wedding guests enjoying their post-celebration brunch. As I approached my parents' table, I noticed how my father sat unusually rigid, his newspapers open but unread. My mother was stirring her coffee absently, her usual composed expression replaced by genuine bewilderment. I slid into the empty chair across from them, bracing myself for their reaction. So, my father began, his voice carefully neutral. "Griffin Elite Security." "Yes," I replied simply. "Which is not, as we were led to believe, a mall security position." "No, it's not." A waiter approached, but my father waved him away impatiently. "The news is calling it one of the nation's most prestigious security firms. They said you're a senior consultant who protects diplomats and executives." There was no point in downplaying it now. "That's correct. And you've let us believe for years that you were working some low-level security job because..." The hurt in my mother's voice was unexpected. "Because you made it abundantly clear that unless I was a doctor or lawyer, my career wasn't worth discussing," I said, keeping my voice level. "You dismissed security work as blue-collar and beneath our family, so I stopped trying to make you understand." My father opened his mouth to object, then closed it again, uncharacteristically lost for words. Before he could formulate a response, my cousin Alexis rushed over to our table, phone in hand. "Oh my God, Cassie, you're all over social media. Look at this." She thrust her phone toward us, showing a TikTok video of my takedown that had already accumulated hundreds of thousands of views. The caption read, "Bridesmaid by day, badass security expert by night. #wedding ninja #security queen. The whole family is talking about it," Alexis continued excitedly. "Uncle Robert says you saved like $500,000 in jewelry and gifts." Is that true? And do you really protect celebrities and billionaires? That's so cool. My mother looked like she might faint. My father was staring at Alexis's phone, watching the footage replay of his daughter, the disappointment, the security guard efficiently neutralizing a notorious criminal. Alexis, could you give us a minute? I asked gently. Oh, sure, sorry, she said, bouncing away to undoubtedly spread the news to more relatives. An uncomfortable silence fell over our table. Finally, my father cleared his throat. Why didn't you tell us the truth about your position? It was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? The one that cut to the heart of our family dynamic. I tried, in the beginning, I said carefully. I tried to explain that security isn't just guards at malls. That there are levels of expertise and specialization, just like in law or medicine. But you weren't interested in hearing it. My mother had the grace to look ashamed. We may have been closed-minded. You introduced me as just a security guard to your colleagues at the rehearsal dinner, I reminded my father. Just yesterday, you were embarrassed by my career. He flinched slightly. I didn't understand what you actually did. You never asked, I replied simply. Not once in the past 5 years have you asked me about my work with any genuine interest. You assumed, and I stopped correcting you. As if the universe had timed it perfectly, a breaking news alert appeared on the restaurant's television. The morning show was now interviewing Lieutenant Rodriguez about the capture of Thomas Ward. We've been trying to catch Ward's crew for months, the officer was saying. The security consultant who apprehended him demonstrated exceptional skill. Griffin Elite is known for hiring only the top professionals in the field, former military special forces, FBI agents, and specialists with unique abilities. They're essentially the Navy SEALs of private security. Every head in the restaurant turned toward the TV, including my parents. I watched their expressions as the magnitude of my actual professional standing began to dawn on them. Is that true? My mother asked quietly. You work with former FBI and military personnel. I train them sometimes, I answered, the admission feeling both vindicating and exhausting. I specialize in covert protection and threat assessment. The clients I can't name would surprise you. My father was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. And your salary? Benefits. Of course, that would be his next question. Comparable to a senior associate at your law firm, Dad. Maybe better, with international assignments. The waiter returned, this time with my brother James and his wife Sophia in tow. James was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen from him before, something approaching respect. Cassie, what the hell, he said, pulling up a chair. Sophia's father called us this morning asking if my ninja sister could consult on security for his company's annual meeting. I thought he was having a stroke or something until we saw the news. For the next hour, as more family members trickled in, I found myself at the center of attention for the first time in my adult life. My aunt and uncle thanked me profusely for saving their daughter's wedding. Cousins peppered me with questions about my work. Even my usually aloof brother seemed genuinely impressed by the footage of my takedown. Throughout it all, my parents remained uncharacteristically quiet, absorbing this new reality where their middle child. The disappointment, the one who had rejected the family path, was suddenly being hailed as something of a hero. As the impromptu family gathering began to disperse, my father finally spoke up again, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Cassandra, we may owe you an apology. It was perhaps the first time I'd ever heard him struggle for words. We made assumptions, my mother added softly. We should have asked more questions. It wasn't a full acknowledgement of how they dismissed my choices for years, but it was a start. The revelation of my actual career had forced them to confront their preconceptions, though I knew one viral video wouldn't instantly heal years of accumulated hurt. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Lieutenant Rodriguez himself appeared, approaching our table with purpose. Ms. Miller, he asked, extending his hand to me. I wanted to thank you personally. We've been after Ward for months. Your intervention was textbook perfect. My father watched this exchange, the respect in the officer's voice unmistakable. I saw something shift in his expression, perhaps the beginning of a reevaluation that had been years in the making. "She's a Miller," he said suddenly, his voice carrying that familiar pride I'd heard him use when discussing James's legal victories or Katie's surgical accomplishments. "Excellence runs in the family." Our eyes met, and for the first time in years, I felt seen by my father, not as the daughter who had disappointed him, but as a professional who had excelled in her chosen field. It wasn't everything, but it was something. As we left the hotel that day, I knew that the family dynamics had shifted irrevocably. The truth was out, the carefully maintained fiction shattered. What would build in its place remained to be seen, but for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope that my parents might finally understand the path I had chosen. The media frenzy that followed the wedding incident gave my family little opportunity to process the revelations about my career privately. By Monday morning, local Boston stations had pieced together more details. I wasn't just a security consultant, but one of Griffin Elite's top operatives, with specialized training that put me in an elite category even within the prestigious firm. A profile piece in the Boston Globe's business section referred to me as one of the most sought-after security experts on the East Coast and mentioned some of my publicly known assignments, including protection details for international business conferences and consulting work for technology companies concerned about industrial espionage. While I had managed to keep most of my high-profile client work confidential, enough information emerged to paint a picture dramatically different from the mall security guard image my family had maintained for years. I had returned to my apartment Sunday night, hoping for a brief respite from the family drama before returning to work on Tuesday. When my doorbell rang Monday afternoon, I wasn't entirely surprised to find my father standing in the hallway, his usual confident posture slightly diminished. "May I come in?" he asked formally, as if visiting a stranger's home. I stepped aside to let him enter. My apartment, which I'd never invited my parents to visit after they'd dismissed my first studio as beneath our family standards, was a spacious two-bedroom in one of Boston's more expensive neighborhoods. The furnishings were minimalist but high quality, the artwork original pieces I'd collected during international assignments. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the Charles River. My father took it all in, his expression unreadable. "This is not what I expected." "What did you expect, Dad?" "That I'd be living in some security guard dormitory." He winced slightly at the edge in my voice. "I suppose I deserve that." I gestured for him to sit on the leather sofa while I took the armchair opposite. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us until he finally spoke. "Your mother wanted to come too, but she had an emergency surgery. She sends her, well, I'm not sure what exactly she sends. We're both still processing." "That makes 3 of us," I replied evenly. My father ran a hand through his silver hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty from a man who prided himself on always knowing exactly what to say. "I've been reading about Griffin Elite since yesterday. Their client list, their reputation in the security industry. It's impressive." "Yes, it is." "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked, the question erupting with surprising emotion. "All these years, we thought you were working some dead-end security job, barely making ends meet. We worried about you." I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. "Worried? Is that what you call it? You belittled my career choice at every opportunity. You made it clear you thought I was wasting my potential. You introduced me to your colleagues as just a security guard, with that tone that said everything about how you really felt." "We didn't understand because you never tried to understand," I interrupted, years of suppressed frustration finally finding voice. "Not once did you ask about my training, my responsibilities, my accomplishments. You decided security work was beneath our family, and that was that." My father looked genuinely stunned by my outburst. In our family, emotions were kept carefully controlled, disagreements handled with cold precision rather than raw feeling. "You're right," he said finally, the admission clearly difficult for him. "We made assumptions based on our own biases." "Your biases," I corrected. "Your narrow definition of success." He nodded slowly. "Perhaps. But you also kept the truth from us deliberately. The Globe article mentioned you've been with Griffin Elite for 4 years. For years of letting us believe something that wasn't true." It was a fair point, and one I had been avoiding confronting within myself. My own pride and resentment had played a role in maintaining the deception. At first, I tried to explain. I said more quietly, "But you and Mom made it clear you weren't interested in understanding security work as a legitimate profession. After a while, it became easier to let you believe what you wanted to believe. And yes, part of me wanted to prove I could succeed without your approval or understanding." My father looked out at the river view for a long moment. "I always thought James and Catherine followed our path because they saw its value. It never occurred to me that they might have done so because they feared our disapproval." The insight surprised me. It was more self-awareness than I'd ever heard from my father. "Do you think they would have chosen differently without that pressure?" I asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "They seem happy in their careers. But I wonder now if I gave any of you enough room to find your own paths." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years of misunderstanding hanging between us. "Your mother and I built our lives around certain principles," he continued eventually. "Achievement, status, carrying on family traditions. We thought we were giving our children advantages by guiding them toward paths we understood. There are many paths to a successful life, Dad. Many ways to make meaningful contributions." "Clearly," he said, gesturing around my apartment. "The Globe article mentioned your starting salary is likely in the six figures." I couldn't help but smile. Some things never changed. My father would always see financial success as a primary measure of worth. "Is that what matters most to you? That I make good money?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. "No, of course not. But I won't pretend it doesn't matter at all. What parent doesn't want their child to be financially secure?" "I've been financially independent since I was 25, Dad. I just never felt the need to prove that to you." Another silence fell between us, less tense than before but still weighted with unspoken thoughts. "Your takedown of that thief was impressive," my father said finally. "The police officer said your technique was textbook perfect." "I've had excellent training." "Clearly." He hesitated before adding, "I'm proud of what you did at the wedding. Protecting the family that way." The words I'd waited years to hear, "I'm proud," finally spoken, but the victory felt hollow somehow. Was he proud of me, or just of an action that had been publicly validated by others? "Would you be proud if it had gone unnoticed?" I asked. "If there had been no news story, no viral video? Would you have been proud of just a security guard then?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable but necessary. "I'd like to think so," he said after a long pause. "But honestly, I don't know. I've spent a lifetime valuing certain kinds of achievement, certain kinds of recognition. I'm not sure I know how to judge success by other metrics." His honesty, at least, was refreshing. "I'd like to understand better," he continued, surprising me again. "What you actually do. Your training. Your work. If you're willing to tell me." It was an olive branch, however small. Before I could respond, my phone rang, my brother James's ringtone. "Do you mind if I take this?" I asked. My father nodded, and I answered the call. "Cassie?" James sounded uncharacteristically hesitant. "Are you free for dinner tonight? I'd like to talk to you about, well, everything, I guess." After arranging to meet James later, I returned to the conversation with my father. For the next hour, I explained my work in terms he could understand. The parallels between security risk assessment and legal case strategy, the professional hierarchy at Griffin Elite, the specialized training I'd undergone. He listened more attentively than he ever had before, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than judgment. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was the beginning of a new understanding. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Your mother would like you to come to dinner on Sunday. Katie will be there too." I think we all have some catching up to do. "I'll check my schedule," I promised, not yet ready to fully commit. After he left, I stood at my window, watching his familiar figure move down the street toward the parking garage, still straight-backed and purposeful, the attorney to his core. But something had shifted, however slightly, in our relationship. The truth, so long buried beneath assumptions and pride on both sides, had finally created an opening for something new to grow. That evening, dinner with James proved surprisingly cathartic. My always proper older brother, whose path had so perfectly aligned with our father's expectations, ordered a whiskey neat and admitted things I'd never expected to hear. "I've always been a bit jealous of you, Cassie," he confessed, the alcohol perhaps loosening his usual reserve. "Your courage to choose your own path. I sometimes wonder if I became an attorney because I wanted to or because it was the path of least resistance." "Do you enjoy your work?" I asked. He considered this seriously. "Most days. But there are moments I wonder about the road not taken. I wanted to study architecture in college, did you know that?" I hadn't known. James and I had never been close enough for that kind of confidence. "Dad talked me out of it," he continued. "Said it was too unstable, too dependent on economic fluctuations." He wasn't wrong, but still. "It's not too late," I suggested. "You could still explore that interest." James smiled ruefully. "Two kids, a mortgage, partnership track. It gets harder to change direction. That's why what you did was brave. You chose your path early and stuck to it, despite the family pressure." His words made me see my own journey differently. What I had framed as stubborn defiance, he saw as courage. Over the next week, family members reached out one by one. My mother called with technical questions about my security training, her surgeon's mind interested in the physical techniques I'd employed. Katie texted congratulations and a request to hear the real story when she wasn't on hospital rotation. Even extended family members, aunts, uncles, cousins who had previously regarded me with benign disinterest, suddenly found my career fascinating. The attention was flattering but also discomfiting. I hadn't chosen security work to impress anyone. I'd chosen it because it aligned with my natural abilities and interests. That the choice had now been externally validated by media attention and family approval felt almost irrelevant to the satisfaction I'd always found in the work itself. The Sunday family dinner arrived with a tension I hadn't felt since college holidays. My mother had prepared my favorite meal, a detail that spoke volumes about her attempt at reconciliation. Katie arrived late from her hospital shift, dark circles under her eyes, but genuinely happy to see me. So, my mother began as we sat around the formal dining table that had hosted so many tense family meals. "Tell us more about this Griffin Elite Company." The Globe article mentioned they're very selective in their hiring. "They are," I confirmed. "They recruit primarily from military special forces, FBI, Secret Service." I was an unusual hire because I came from corporate security instead. "But they saw something in you," my father added, surprising me with what sounded almost like pride. "My threat assessment skills tested in the top percentile," I explained. "I have a knack for identifying behavioral anomalies, patterns that don't fit." "Like noticing the thieves at the wedding," Katie interjected. "Exactly. Most people see what they expect to see. I'm trained to notice what doesn't belong." "Is it dangerous?" my mother asked, her surgeon's composure slipping to reveal maternal concern. "It can be," I admitted. "But we're very well trained for risk management." The conversation continued, more open and genuine than any family discussion I could remember. My father asked about my international assignments, Katie was curious about the physical training aspects, and my mother, ever practical, inquired about health insurance and retirement benefits. As dessert was served, my father cleared his throat in the way he always did before making an important pronouncement. "I owe you an apology, Cassandra," he said formally. "I've spent years dismissing your career choice without making any effort to understand it. That was short-sighted of me." Coming from my father, it was tantamount to throwing himself at my feet begging forgiveness. The Thomas Miller I'd grown up with rarely admitted error of any kind. "We both owe you an apology," my mother added. "We should have trusted your judgment more." "We should have trusted all of you more," my father amended, glancing at James and Katie. "Perhaps focus less on what we wanted for you and more on what you wanted for yourselves." The admission hung in the air, significant beyond the immediate context of my security career. It was an acknowledgement of a parenting philosophy that had shaped all our lives, for better or worse. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "But I want to be clear about something. I don't need your approval of my career choices. I've been confident in my path for years. What hurt wasn't that you didn't approve, it was that you didn't respect me enough to try to understand. My father nodded slowly, absorbing the distinction. That's fair. And deserved. So where do we go from here? Katie asked practically. Forward, I hope, I replied, with more honesty and less assumption on all sides. As we finished dessert and moved to the living room for coffee, I noticed my father lingering near the family photos displayed on the mantel. He picked up one I hadn't seen before, me in my Griffin Elite uniform at a corporate event, clearly cut from a magazine article. I found this online yesterday, he explained. Thought it belonged with the family collection. It was a small gesture, but a meaningful one, my professional identity finally acknowledged as part of the family narrative. The evening ended with tentative plans for more regular family dinners and a genuine, if awkward, hug from my father as I left. The years of misunderstanding couldn't be erased in a single evening, but the foundation for a new relationship had been laid. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how external validation had finally forced my family to see me clearly. But the real victory wasn't in their newfound respect. It was in the knowledge that I had never needed it to be sure of my own path. 3 months after the wedding incident, Boston's brief autumn had given way to the first chill of winter. The media attention had faded, my viral moment relegated to occasional remember when references from clients who recognized me. Life had largely returned to normal, though normal now included a significantly altered family dynamic. I stood in my parents' kitchen, helping my mother prepare for Sunday dinner. Now a monthly tradition rather than the rare, tension-filled event it had once been. Through the doorway, I could see my father and James discussing something over drinks in the living room, their postures relaxed in a way that would have been unthinkable at family gatherings of the past. Katie called, my mother said, checking something in the oven. She's running late again. Hospital emergency. Of course, I replied, continuing to chop vegetables for the salad. Some things never change. My mother glanced at me, a small smile playing at her lips. And some things do. I never thought I'd see you voluntarily helping in the kitchen. I never thought I'd be invited back after choosing the wrong career, I countered, but without the bitterness that would have colored such a remark 3 months ago. My mother's hands stilled on the counter. We made mistakes, Cassie. Serious ones. I know, Mom. So did I. I paused in my chopping. I could have been more open, less defensive. Pride runs in the family, it seems. She nodded thoughtfully. Your father has been reading books about Griffin Elite and private security operations. Did you know that? I hadn't known, and the information touched me unexpectedly. Really? He ordered them the day after the wedding. He's trying, Cassie. We both are. The effort wasn't just on their side. I had been making my own attempts to bridge the gap. Sharing more details about my work when appropriate, asking genuine questions about their careers without the defensive edge that had characterized our interactions for years. The doorbell rang, and my mother wiped her hands on a towel. That must be Katie. Could you get that while I finish here? I opened the front door to find not just Katie, but also her new boyfriend, Mark, and my teenage niece Lily. James's 14-year-old daughter, who had recently taken to following me around with undisguised admiration. Aunt Cassie, Lily exclaimed, giving me a hug that nearly knocked me backward. I got an A on my career presentation about you. About me. I echoed, surprised. It was supposed to be about someone with an unusual career, Lily explained as they entered. All the other girls did, like fashion designers or vets. But I did high-level security consultant and used you as my example. My teacher didn't believe some of it until I showed her the news video. James appeared from the living room, greeting his daughter with a hug. She's been talking about this presentation for weeks. Apparently, Aunt Cassie is much cooler than boring old dad the attorney. There was no resentment in his tone, only good-natured acceptance that perhaps the family hierarchy of impressive careers was shifting. Dinner that evening was livelier than any family meal I could remember. Katie's boyfriend Mark, a pediatric nurse with an infectious laugh, brought a new energy to the traditionally formal Miller gatherings. My father, who once would have subtly interrogated any newcomer about their educational pedigree and career prospects, instead listened with genuine interest to Mark's stories about hospital life. "So, Cassie," my father said during a lull in conversation, "tell us about this new assignment you mentioned. Something about a tech conference?" 3 months ago, such a question would have been unthinkable, not because my father wouldn't have asked it, but because I wouldn't have mentioned my assignments at all. "It's a major technology summit in San Francisco next month," I explained. "Several high-profile CEOs with some serious security concerns. I'm leading the advanced team." "That sounds fascinating," my father said, and the remarkable thing was that he seemed to genuinely mean it. "Is it similar to the diplomatic protection work you did in Geneva last year?" The fact that he remembered details about my previous assignments, information I'd cautiously shared over recent family dinners, was itself a sign of how much had changed. "Similar protocols, but different threat assessment matrices," I replied, finding myself naturally shifting into the technical aspects of my work. "Corporate security involves more industrial espionage concerns, fewer political threats." My father nodded thoughtfully. "I imagine there's overlap with some of the intellectual property cases we handle at the firm." "Absolutely. In fact, I consulted on a case last year where a client's trade secrets were compromised through physical security weaknesses rather than cyber breaches." We continued discussing the intersection of legal and security concerns, a conversation that would have been impossible months ago. Not because I couldn't have participated in such a discussion, but because neither of us would have acknowledged the other's expertise as valuable or relevant. After dinner, as James and Katie cleared the table, another change in family dynamics, where tasks were now shared rather than delegated along traditional gender lines, my niece Lily cornered me on the sofa. "Can I ask you something, Aunt Cassie?" she said, her voice uncharacteristically serious for a teenager. "It's about my career day presentation." "Of course." She glanced toward the kitchen, ensuring we had a moment of privacy. "My teacher asked why I chose you as my subject instead of Grandpa or Dad, since they have more established careers." Her air quotes made her opinion of this assessment clear. I told her it was because you followed your own path even when everyone thought you were wrong. Is that really what happened? The question, asked with a teenager's blunt simplicity, caught me off guard with its insight. "That's a big part of it," I admitted. "I chose a career that felt right to me, even though it wasn't what was expected." "Was it scary? Going against what everyone wanted?" I considered this carefully, wanting to give her an honest answer. "Sometimes. There were moments I doubted myself, wondered if I was making a mistake. It's not easy being the family disappointment." "But you weren't really a disappointment," Lily protested. "You were successful all along. They just couldn't see it." "That's true. But what matters is that I knew my own value, even when others didn't recognize it. That's the hard part, believing in yourself when no one else seems to." Lily nodded solemnly. "I want to study environmental science. Dad keeps talking about pre-law programs, but I don't think that's for me." The confidence she placed in me, sharing doubts she clearly hadn't voiced to her father, felt significant. "Your dad might surprise you," I suggested gently. "I think our family is learning that success can look different for different people." Our conversation was interrupted as my father entered the room, followed by a colleague he'd apparently invited for after-dinner drinks, an older attorney I vaguely recognized from previous firm events. "Richard, I'd like you to meet my daughter," my father said, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder. "Cassandra Miller, Senior Security Consultant at Griffin Elite. She specializes in threat assessment and high-level protection services." The introduction, so different from the dismissive, "she's just a security guard," that had sparked this entire journey, wasn't delivered with embarrassment or qualification, but with the same pride he'd always used when introducing James or Katie. Yes," Richard replied, extending his hand. "Thomas has been telling me about your work. Quite impressive credentials. We've actually been considering Griffin Elite for our firm's international conference security next year." As we discussed the potential security needs of his law firm's event, I caught my father watching us with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, not quite pride, not quite regret, but perhaps a complex mixture of both. Later, As guests departed and family members prepared to leave, my father drew me aside in his home office, the sanctum where he had once counseled me against my security career ambitions. "I've been meaning to give you something," he said, opening a desk drawer. He withdrew a small box and handed it to me. Inside was a sleek business card holder in polished silver. Engraved on its surface was my name and Griffin Elite Security. "I had it made after the wedding," he explained. I thought, well, every professional should have proper business cards. The gift wasn't extravagant, but from my father, a man who placed enormous significance on professional trappings, it represented something profound, acknowledgement of my professional identity on its own terms. "Thank you," I said simply, knowing he would understand the layers of meaning behind those two words. "I was wrong, Cassandra," he said quietly. "Not just about your career, but about what success really means." I measured it in such narrow terms: degrees, titles, the right kind of profession. I miss seeing that true success is excellence in whatever path you choose. The admission, coming from a man who rarely acknowledged error, felt monumental. "We can't change the past," I replied. "But I'm glad we're finding a better way forward." He nodded, his usual eloquence seemingly abandoned. After a moment, he added, "I'm proud of you, Cassandra. Not because you're suddenly recognized or because your job turns out to be prestigious after all. I'm proud of your conviction, your certainty in your own path. That's something I should have valued all along." The words I'd waited years to hear, not just "I'm proud," but an acknowledgement of my internal compass rather than external validation, filled a space inside me I hadn't realized was still empty. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey of the past 3 months. The wedding incident had forced a confrontation that was perhaps long overdue, bringing to light misunderstandings and biases on all sides. The external validation of my career had opened a door, but the real healing had come through the conversations that followed, the difficult, honest exchanges that had allowed my family to see me clearly and, perhaps more importantly, allowed me to see them as flawed, well-intentioned humans rather than just the judges of my life choices. The painful irony wasn't lost on me, that after years of resenting my family's fixation on external validation, it had taken precisely that kind of public recognition to break through our impasse. But perhaps that was simply human nature. Sometimes we need to be shaken out of our established patterns before we can see beyond them. In the end, the lesson wasn't that I needed my family's approval or that they needed to recognize my professional success. It was that genuine understanding requires openness on all sides, a willingness to explain without defensiveness, to listen without preconception, to recognize that our differing paths can all lead to meaningful lives. As I pulled into my apartment building's garage, my phone pinged with a text from Lily. "Thanks for talking today. I told Dad about environmental science. He said we'd research programs together this weekend. You were right." I smiled, thinking about how family patterns can change, how rigid expectations can soften, how bridges can be built across even the deepest divides. Sometimes it takes a dramatic moment, a wedding day crisis, a viral video, a public revelation, to catalyze that change. But the real work happens in the quiet moments that follow, in kitchens and living rooms and honest conversations. The security guard and the attorney, the surgeon and the environmental scientist in training. We were all finding our way toward a new understanding of family, of success, of what it means to truly see and support one another. And that, perhaps, was the most important security of all. Have you ever had a moment when your family or friends finally saw you for who you really are? Or have you experienced being misunderstood by those closest to you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about family relationships, personal growth, and finding your own path. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to follow their own journey, even when others don't understand it at first. Thank you for joining me for this deeply personal story, and I'll see you in the next video.